Following the expulsion of the Moors from Spain in 1492, Christopher Columbus would set sail to the Americas on the most fateful of voyages. While this narrative has been ridiculed, weaponized, and outright denied as propaganda, there is one aspect of the Columbus story that has never received the attention it deserves. Were you aware of the fact that Christopher Columbus set sail with an Irish navigator? That's right, an Irishman whom he had met in Galway. The identity of this man and the reasons for his presence on this voyage are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the hidden Irish history of ancient America. In explaining the significance of this lone Irishman, a connection will be established between the Irish and the Phoenicians of antiquity, the civilization most capable of pre-columbian transatlantic travel. For why is it that an Irishman was needed to go where men were said to have never gone before? We will also bring to light the multitude of so-called Native American tribes that do or did in fact share genetic and cultural affiliation with ancient Celts and Britons. This of course will include the infamous red-headed giants scattered not only through the Americas, but across the entire earth. As the Irish presence in the Americas did not begin with Columbus, it certainly did not end with him. No academic has ever been able to give a satisfactory explanation as to why there are only 5 million Irish people in all of Ireland, yet the ethnically Irish in the United States alone number over 36 million. 5 million Irish versus 36 million Irish Americans. Something is not adding up. The ominous "they" would have you believe that this is simply the result of potato shortages and a recent mass migration. The Irish, strangers to colonization and the subjugation of others, have themselves been kicked around for far too long. This presentation is dedicated to the Land of Iron, the Isle of Emerald, and the fairest daughter of Atlantis. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect my own. Now enjoy.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Introducing Dr. Narco Longo.
We will now discuss Guillermo Herries, the Irishman responsible for showing Columbus the way to America. The following comes to us from Jerry Finzi. Quote, "Did an Irishman sail with Columbus to discover the New World? His name doesn't sound Irish when you read it in the Spanish naval documents, but Guillermo Herries, a Portuguese translation of his name, was really William Harris of Galway. It's no surprise that Irish children never heard of Guillermo, even though he was a member of Columbus's first voyage with the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. As historians have theorized based on their evidence, William Harris first met Columbus at St. Nicholas Church in Galway in 1477. Some say he discussed strange, unknown plant seeds and other objects washing up along the shoreline in Ireland, possibly from some far-off land, while others think Harris boasted to Columbus that he had actually sailed to these lands to the west. Columbus was also emboldened by stories he heard of the 6th century monk, St. Brendan, and his voyage to the New World. It's not too difficult to believe that Harris might have reached America before 1492, since it's been proven that Leif Erikson had also been there hundreds of years earlier in a failed attempt at setting up a colony in the northern regions. Guillermo Herries is one of 38 people listed as being left by Columbus in Haiti to form the first European settlement in the New World. In the end, after a short time, the native population slaughtered them all. End quote. The next excerpt comes to us from Amanda Driscoll in reference to the mysterious William Harris. Quote, Irishman who sailed to America with Christopher Columbus. Who was this mysterious Galway man who sailed with Columbus on his first voyage to the West in 1492? In a box in the archives of the National University of Ireland, Galway, there is a bundle of yellowed letters, dating from 1935 to 1936, about a mysterious Galway man who sailed with Columbus on his first voyage to the West in 1492. Mysterious Irishman Guillermo Herries. It seems that in 1935, a Chicago-based organization named the Guillermo Herries League enlisted the help of historians, librarians, and scholars in a bid to prove that this Irishman had, in fact, landed in America before Columbus. They hoped to name a bridge after this brave Irish explorer, but unfortunately their hopes were never realized. The Irishman in question was recorded in the Spanish Navy records as Guillermo Herries, an unlikely name for an Irishman, you might think, and you'd be right. Perhaps, if he had been known by William Harris, rather than the Portuguese translation of his name, then he would be better known in Irish history. Surely every Irish child should learn that an Irishman was part of the famous voyage of the Nina, the Pinta, and Santa Maria. St. Nicholas's Church in Galway is known to have been visited by Columbus in 1477, and it was supposedly here that Guillermo met Columbus and inspired him with tales of lands to the west that he had visited himself. The legend of St. Brendan's voyage was said to have provided extra fuel for Columbus's dreams. It is certainly not impossible that Guillermo could have reached America before 1492, as Leif Erikson and his band of Norsemen had already traveled to America hundreds of years beforehand.
Groves of palm trees dot the landscape of southwestern Ireland, thanks to the warmth of the Gulf Stream and prevailing westerly winds. The Canary and North Equatorial currents complete a clockwise circulation of the North Atlantic. Even before the winds and waters steered Columbus to the New World and back, variations of Ogham flourished, as shown in the Book of Ballymote. Ogham in America suggests somebody crossed the Atlantic a long, long time ago. The trade winds, westward currents, and strong oarsmen could have gotten them to the Caribbean within weeks. There, summertime tropical lows could have steered them into the Gulf of Mexico and toward the mouth of the Mississippi. 7 southern states are highlighted on this map, but without maps, the newcomers would have relied on rivers to go upstream and return downstream. The one known today as the Arkansas River might have led explorers to our region of interest. Its tributaries, the Purgatoire and the Cimarron, as well as a more southerly waterway, the Canadian, virtually encircle the High Plains area where our presumed Ogham appears.
All right, we've got 2 through the stem line.
That's a G.
You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through the stem line.
That's an R.
And 1, 2, 3 through the stem line.
And Grion, sun.
That's right.
It is certainly true, Ogham. They are as important as the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls for biblical criticism. That this shows that the Irish were not confined to the British Isles or to a small island of Ireland, that missionaries or others are traders. We must look into the possibility of traders.
This alphabetic key compares Irish Ogham shown on the green background with presumed Ogham in Colorado on a salmon-colored background. The tiny vowel nicks found in Ireland are not found in America, but often the more elaborate diphthongs are. What's striking is the shared transatlantic consonants. They're all but identical. Solstices, equinoxes, and seasonal midways called cross quarters were vital to ancient people for regulating their calendars and knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when to stay, when to move. From the Earth on the ecliptic plane, the sun appears to cycle each year past the same twinkling stars of the zodiac. Equinoxes and solstices are separated by precise 90-degree angles according to astronomical convention. The cross quarters exactly bisect these and served as Celtic boundaries for each of the 4 seasons. The Celts named the cross quarters Bealtaine, Lunasa, Samhain, and Imbolg. Displayed below these names are the modern calendar dates that match them astronomically.
Tim Severin's reenactment of St. Brendan's Voyage proved that the 6th century monk may have even reached America centuries before that. So why not Guillermo? Unfortunately, the voyage of 1492 was to be his last. Guillermo's name can be seen on the list of 38 people left behind in what is now modern-day Haiti, to form the first European settlement in the New World. Although the Galway man lived in peace with the natives for a time, by Christmas of 1492, the locals rebelled, and the entire garrison is believed to have been slaughtered. However, in the records of the Guillermo Herries League, a rumor persists of a daring escape in the pinnacle of the Santa Maria by the Irishman and several others to the coast of Mexico, where they were shipwrecked near the mouth of the Mississippi River, in the vicinity of present-day city of New Orleans. Despite the hopes of the leagues that championed his name, Herries never did provide the name for the new bridge in Chicago. The facts, fiction, and mysteries of this little-known Irish explorer remain in the archives of Galway University, and, although we may never know how Guillermo died, we can be proud of the fact that he was part of such a significant event in world history." End quote. The following comes to us from architect and city planner Richard L. Thornton. Quote, "Irish colonists came to southeastern North America 4 times, long before Columbus. One cannot deny the existence of DNA. Eastern Creek, Yuchi families in Georgia, such as my own, are showing up with strange DNA profiles. No Amerindian DNA test markers, typical the rest of the United States, but a hefty level of southern Mesoamerican, Maya, Zoque, Totonac, and Toltec, Panoan in Peru, Polynesian, Maori, Sami, Finnish, Basque, and pre-Celtic Irish. Of course, we also carry the colonial period admixture of Celtic Scottish, Celtic Irish, and in some families, Sephardic DNA from the 17th century Jewish gold miners in the Georgia mountains. Muskogee Creeks, who don't have as much Yuchi heritage, might not have much ancient DNA from northern Europe or southern Mexico, but typically will also carry DNA markers typical of northern Mexico, such as Pima and Chichimaca. The Upper Creeks carry a lot of Toltec DNA markers. The Toltecs and the Upper Creeks are extremely tall, lanky folks. One cannot deny the existence of words. The long hours of analyzing the place names on modern and colonial period maps are bearing far more fruit than I could imagine. What is appearing is a very different ethnic pattern in the southeastern United States than the one which is presented in anthropology books and internet references such as Wikipedia. First of all, most of the region was an ethnic patchwork quilt, whereas contemporary academics define the region in the framework of a few modern, federally recognized tribes. The much more detailed French maps, included in a book that I recently bought from a publisher in Canada, have made it possible to see a much clearer view of what North America was like prior to the devastation wreaked by the French-sponsored beaver pelt trade and the British-sponsored Native American slave trade. Within the southeast were many, many provinces, speaking many languages from several parts of the Americas. Within the eastern half of the southeast, I have identified the following languages: Yuchi, Chickasaw, Upper Creek, Itza Maya, Muskogee, Iroquoian, numerous Algonquin tongues, Siouan, Ufo, Polynesian, Kansa, Oto or Otto, Panoan from Peru, Southern Arawak from South America, Middle Arawak from the northern edge of South America, Taino, Northern Arawak, Tupi from Amazonia, Toa from Cuba, and Puerto Rico, plus Irish Gaelic. Yes, Irish Gaelic. What happened was that the pre-columbian immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, and Scandinavia intermarried with the immigrants from Mexico, South America, and the Caribbean, who were the majority. By the time British immigrants arrived in North America, the mestizo descendants of this mixing just looked like Indians of varying skin color. There were exceptions, though. The Tok'are of the Southern Highlands still had the freckles of the Tok'ari of Ireland. Today, the Muskogee Creek for freckled is Tok'ali, or Tok'ara. Fourth immigration. There was a tribe called the Duhar on the coast of South Carolina, in Georgia, which spoke early medieval Gaelic. Duhar means Irish. They raised dairy deer and made cheese from this milk. They cultivated both Native American and Irish crops. However, they lived in houses and made pottery almost identical to that of their American Indian neighbors. In the late 1600s, the surviving Duhar either blended in with British colonists or moved westward and joined one of the Creek provinces. At the request of the cultural attaché at the Irish consulate in New York City, the Duhar words, recorded by two Spanish explorers, were examined by a professor at Trinity College in Dublin. He said that they were easily matched with the dialect of Irish spoken in Southern Ireland during the early medieval period. Monastic journals in France and Ireland described the persecution of the Osrae tribe in Leinster by Anglo-Norman conquerors. Both they and Scandinavians on the eastern coast of Ireland fled to Whitmansland across the Atlantic in Scandinavian sailing ships. Osrae means deer people. The Irish scholar told me that dairy deer was the primary source of milk for the Irish until the Vikings introduced dairy goats and the English introduced dairy cows. End quote. The following comes to us from Donald Nolan in reference to the Duhar tribe. Carey's potential link with pre-Columbian America came to light in new research on a famous book, De Orbo Nova, written in 1521 by Spanish historian and professor Peter Martyr de Anguera. The Spaniard interviewed as many Native Americans as he could about the history of the area before the arrival of Europeans. Many of his subjects spoke of a tribe called the Duhar, living in the Carolinas and into Georgia. Taller than Native Americans and Spaniards, their hair was red to brown, and their most famous leader was a tattoo-covered giant called Datha or Data. Meanwhile, a group of native researchers were attempting to carry out as comprehensive a chronicle of Native American language as has ever been mounted, documenting each and every word. They were able to find translations for all native words until they got to the region of the legendary Duhar. Many words associated with native life in the area stumped them. That was until they began comparisons with the Irish language. Finding the exact same word for deer, thea, had been used in the region among the Duhar. Their research also brought them to a translation for the name of Datha or Data himself, derived from the Irish for color. This certainly chimed with his painted appearance. Martyr de Angira also learned that the Duhar, possibly meaning from Ireland, if their language was indeed Irish, lived much more peaceably with natives than the later Spanish colonists. While the research is far from definitive, it is another tantalizing glimpse into what might have been along with St. Brendan in Viking lore." End quote. The following comes to us from Christina Rose. Quote, "Were the Irish living in the southeast before Columbus arrived? Could there have been Irish living in the southeast with indigenous people of this country before the arrival of Columbus? One of the first recorded curiosities originated in 1521, when Spaniard Peter Martyr took reports from Columbus and other explorers who had investigated the southeast coast of today's South Carolina and Georgia. A baptized Chicora native and a Spanish explorer reported to Martyr that they had come upon a group of people who called themselves the Duhar. The Duhar were different than the Chicora natives in that area. While all the local natives were described as having varying degrees of brown skin, the Duhar were described as white skin, with brown hair that hung to their heels. They were said to herd deer in the way that Europeans herded cattle. Martyr wrote that the fawns were kept in the houses, and the deer would go out to pasture during the day, returning at night to suckle their fawns. After the deer had nursed their young, they were milked and the milk was turned to cheese. Deer milk has been celebrated in Gaelic poetry, but usually in mythical situations. Reindeer were herded in Scotland until the 1300s, and a paper by Aaron na Minavera from Ireland mentions deer being milked, but more in mythic terms than as regular part of the diet. There was other evidence that these Duhar could have been Irish. They were said to keep poultry, chicken, ducks, geese, and other similar fowl, and potatoes were said to have been grown in the area, though they were not yet an important food in Ireland. In West Virginia, there was a ruckus when Dr. Barry Fell, a professor at Harvard University, said he found writing on a rock he described as, quote, Christian messages in Old Irish script. Although he was the editor and co-author of 8 books that deciphered ancient writings, Fell found himself discredited by other experts when it came to this particular rock writing.
Has American science failed to adequately consider evidence for a pre-Columbian Indo-European presence here? Yes, says Dr. Barry Fell.
It's only a group of American archaeologists who have suffered from the peculiar manner in which archaeologists are educated in this country, totally omitting any knowledge of ancient languages whatever, so that they can't recognize them when they see them. It's only them that are the real problem.
As a result of certain misguided efforts by some people that drew Mr. Fell and his cult following into this field. Certain letters went out trying to resolve the issue. Dr. Calvin Watkins, who is in the Department of Linguistics at Harvard University, his opening statement is, I have examined the photographs of Colorado petroglyphs at 5LA115, which you sent me on September 1. I can state categorically that they are not a variant of Ogham a la Barry Fell, as you put it in your letter. Then he goes on in some detail explaining what real Ogham looks like. Interestingly, true Ogham is written vertically, not horizontally, only horizontally in very, very rare cases.
If you will look at his fine example of Ogham, in which you have so strongly relied upon, and then you compare it to a respectable example of Ogham, you'll find that he doesn't even have the correct number of strokes for the letter D. And so that your expert can't even write Ogham himself.
I see.
And then he goes on.
That's why he is the linguist at Harvard and you are not.
Your other expert that says there's no Ogham outside the British Isles is absolutely incorrect. There is some in Europe, in Africa, in North and South America. It exists, and it is Ogham.
This article ran in the student newspaper the day the University of Colorado's Cultural Events Board convened a discussion of the discoveries. Academic voices objected. It's not supported by any kind of scientific evidence. Yet science and rigorous evaluation are at work. The rock art dating, the archaeoastronomy, epigraphy, and linguistics do matter. By suggesting natives may not be responsible for all ancient rock inscriptions in Colorado, Ogham researchers were accused of politicizing the issue. There are no professional archaeologists who would take this claim seriously. The case for an ancient Celtic presence in CU's own backyard has been building for 25 years, but the advocates have been repeatedly shamed by most of academia, as if the story should simply be buried and forgotten. Ignoring data is not good science.
We resume with the words of Richard L. Thornton. Quote, I have found a great deal of similarity between archaic Irish and archaic Swedish. For example, the indigenous name for Ireland is I-Re or Ir-Ri, which means island nation. The same word in archaic Swedish would be Isrik or Isrik. I strongly suspect that the same people introduced the Iron Age to both regions. Strangely enough, archaic Swedish words, such as the word bow, meaning a living space, also can be found in the Panoan languages of Peru, and ultimately, in South Carolina, indigenous ethnic names, such as Cusabo and Westibo. Third immigration. The Algonquin, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Muskogee languages use the same suffix for people or tribe as is used today in Irish Gaelic or An Gaelic. You can also find that same gi or ki or gay or k suffix in several South American tribes. Whether written as ki or gi, it is pronounced the same by all of those peoples. I have also found some Gaelic words in Siouan, Muskogee, and Cherokee. Now explain that without including a pan-North Atlantic connection. Second immigration. The largest component of Irish DNA is from peoples who immigrated there from the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal are today. This immigration probably occurred during the early Bronze Age. They were attracted to Western Ireland because of the large gold deposits, and to Eastern Ireland because of the fertile land with plenty of rainfall. Gold is especially abundant in County Kerry, on the southwest corner of Ireland. There was a linguistic breakthrough for me when I remembered that the Muskegean and Yuchi R is rolled so hard that English and French speakers typically write it down as an L. There were many tribes in the Carolinas and Georgia whose names ended in ri. However, the le or li suffix is endemic in the southeast and the Gulf Coast of Mexico. There were at least 7 tribes originating in South Carolina or the coastal plain of Georgia, which had the same exact names has Bronze Age tribes in Ireland, whose names are now counties or towns in Ireland. For example, the Kealakee Creek tribal town in Oklahoma has the same name as Keavri tribe that gave County Kerry, Ireland, its name. In addition, the "gie" suffix at the end of the Kealakee is Irish and Scottish Gaelic. The early Bronze Age in Ireland and Sweden was characterized by a continued fabrication of flint swords, stone tools, plus increasing use of copper ornament, copper arrowheads, copper hatchets, and some bronze hatchets. Only the elite possessed the ornate bronze art and weapons that you see in museums. The pottery of both regions was called corded beakerware. Early Bronze Age elite in both regions were buried in log tombs beneath dome-shaped burial mounds. The burial mounds in both regions were identical. The collapse of the early Bronze Age in Scandinavia and Ireland, due to some type of massive natural catastrophe, coincided with the appearance of the Deptford culture, literally in downtown Savannah, Georgia. The Deptford culture was characterized by corded beakerware ceramics, flint swords, limited use of copper, and log tombs beneath dome-shaped mounds. The Yuchi have consistently stated that their ancestors sailed across the Atlantic from the home of the sun and landed at the mouth of the Savannah River. I found several words in the branch of Siouans known as the Dagiha, which were also Irish words or similar to Irish words. The Dagiha Siouans originated in the southeast, but immigrated to the northern plains in the 1600s and early 1700s, where they became known as the Earth Lodge people. 2 of their towns with earth lodges have been excavated in Georgia: the King Village site on the Coosa River and the Bullard Landing site on the Ocmulgee River, south of Macon, Georgia. Prior to the construction of the Cherokee capital of New Echeta, that location was the village of Kansagi-Yi, which means place of the Kansa people in Cherokee. The Kansa, or Ka people, are one of the best-known Earth Lodge tribes. In the 1800s, they also called themselves the Coosa. The earliest people of Ireland probably looked very similar to American Indians, since the presence of Stonehenges on both sides of the Atlantic suggest frequent encounters of a third kind. However, they were almost erased from the island by a flood that lasted for 20 years in the 24th century BC. This period of ethnic cleansing in Ireland and the lower elevations of England corresponds to the appearance near Savannah, Georgia, of the oldest known pottery north of Amazonia in the Americas and of the oldest known shell rings in North America along the Georgia coast. There has to be some sort of connection. A note on the Yamassee. All history books and Wikipedia articles tell you that the Yamassee Indians became extinct within a few decades of the Yamassee War, 1715 to 1717. Not so. I have found the names of most of the pre-war Yamassee towns in North Georgia, mostly in Atlanta metro area. The survivors of this bloody war merely moved north up the Oconee River and joined the Creek Confederacy." End quote. The following comes to us from the Burlington Free Press and Times on Monday, October 23rd, 1905. Quote, "America discovered by Irishmen. Indian names derived from Irish cognomens. This country, the joint production of Columbus and the Celts. The Order of Knights of Columbus is a numerous body of Catholic laymen, composed largely of men of Irish descent. At a recent barbecue and reunion of the District of Columbia Knights, in the outskirts of Washington, the principal speaker was Professor J.C. Monaghan of the Department of Commerce and Labor. Professor Monaghan said in part, 'Not long ago, where you all stand, was the hunting ground of a race of people with a skin of reddish hue. Here lived another people. Here the Indian hunter pursued and slaughtered his game. Here the Indian lover sought the dusky maiden of his choice and never gave up till he won her. To this country came the seeds of life and death, the first for you, and the other for the native. How miserable is man when the foot of the oppressor is on his neck. We have simply to look to the first inhabitant of this continent and see the truth of the statement, how the noble red man has gone down. It is time to do justice while the capital stands, and with God's help it will stand while man needs it. When I was teacher in Wisconsin, I came across Professor Anderson, a Dane, who had devoted half 100 years to proving that the Danes, under Leif, son of Eric, had discovered this country. He based his belief on certain analogies that he was sure were irresistible. Examination revealed a whole world of big books written to prove that if the Dane didn't do it, the Chinese did. Everybody, anybody, only not the one who actually did. Fascinated with the analogical reasoning of Anderson and the others, I took up the delightful task of proving, why not, that this country was discovered by the Irish. By way of preface, let me say that Leif, Professor Anderson being my authority, visited Iceland before he set out on his famous trip to Vineland. He went thither to see his father, Eric, who was in exile. From him he learned that a lot of old Icelandic monks, many of whom were Irish, had a legend of a land to the west, to which they gave the poetic name of Vineland. As the tale was told, some Irish monks had gone thither years before. Now, as a matter of historic fact, let it be noted that Iceland was Christianized by Irish monks. Ireland, in the ancient days, was the Emerald Isle. It was called the Green Island, not only by the Irish, but by the Romans. When the Irish went to Iceland, they left it Iceland. They had no desire to change its name, for it too, like their own home, was an island. But when they went on and found the mainland, what did they call it? Greenland. Here then is the rationale, logical explanation of a problem that has puzzled hundreds of American and English schoolboys for hundreds of years. The problem of Greenland's name. For the land is covered with snow and ice year in and year out. All the time. Why the name of Greenland? The Irish named it such out of love for their island home. Do you follow the analogy? In Newport, Rhode Island, there is a round tower. By whom it was built, For what purpose or when, nobody knows. In Ireland, there are 30 or 40 round towers. There they stand, grim, grey, hoary, eloquent monuments of a mighty past. Dr. Petrie, the greatest archaeologist the island ever produced, was never able to tell their story. The abodes of silence of the Parsees in India are not more awful in their silence than our island's round towers. But why not, reasoning by analogy, assume that the builders of Newport's round tower were the builders of Ireland's round towers? In Ireland, every family was a sept. If you take down any reputable dictionary, you will find a sept defined as a group of related persons, claiming descent from a common ancestor, and subject to the paternal rule of an hereditary chief, especially in ancient Ireland, a branch of a race or tribe, a joint family, clan. Every tribe in the United States was a sept. There was the Narragansett, the Punagansett, the Neponset. Follow my analogies. Every tribe in Ireland was a sept. Every tribe in America was a sept. So close does this analogy run that we find in Ireland the Beaner-Hassets. You remember the conspirator of Aaron Burr, Beaner-Hassett? The poor dupe of Burr was an Irish gentleman. Now note again the Narragansetts were the Irish Narraganas sept. The Meonhanset were the Irish Monaghan sept. The Onondagas changed their name for poetic euphony to Odonogans. Letter for letter, they are alike. You say the Omaha Indians. In Ireland, we say the O'Meekers. You say the Osceolas. We say the O'Scollys. You say the Oregons. We say the O'Regans. You talk of the Michigans. We talk of the McEgans people. You say the Orioles. With us in Ireland, and here, there were and are O'Reillys. To what nation, if not Ireland, could the Micmacs or the Mackinacs belong? Wisconsin's Oconomowocs owe their origin to an incident of travel, as the tribe or clan or sept was wending its way westward. O'Connor fell behind. When somebody said wait, the O'Chief settled the matter by saying, O'Connor may walk. Hence the Oconomowocs. The Hurons are transmogrified Hurons, and the Hurons are as Irish as Paddy McLaughlin's pig. The Tennessees are an Americanized form of the Hennessees. Kintiel is Indian for Kinsale. Tell me, if you can, where Patchogue came from, if not from Paddy's land. Uskabo is the Indian for firewater, but Usekabo is the Irish for whiskey. What is one to do with the Omimis, the Okmulgees, the Okades, the Okanokes, the Okanogans, the Okianas, the Okeechobes, the Okeefanokes, etc., etc.? The Omaguas are all from Omagh, and Omagh is a Tyrone, Ireland, market town. The Algonquins are lineal descendants of the Knights of Innikin of Ireland. And to crown all, what is the first move made by the Irish when they get to New York? They join Tammany, and Tammany is an old Indian tribe name. Just another analogy. The most remarkable of all, the laws of the two people, Ireland's laws of tanistry, and the laws of its brechin, or judges, are identical with the tribal laws of the American Indians. Come with me once more to Massachusetts. Our ancestors, our Indian forebears, are wending their way down out of the hills of New Hampshire. They are on the banks of a lordly river. They are giving it a name. They disagree, as they did of yore, over the day of St. Patrick's birth. As then, the parish priest decides by a compromise, added the 8th of one party to the 9th of the other, and fixed the saint's birthday on the 17th. To please all parties, he calls it the Merrimack River. Could analogists be more complete? Is there a flaw anywhere, a loophole as large as a pinhead? If you can go home satisfied that this country is the joint production of the ancient Irish and Christopher Columbus, into history Pat and the Dago will go, henceforth hand in hand. No one can hinder it, possibly no one, after hearing this, will care to undertake the task of hindering it." End quote. We resume with the words of Donald Nolan in reference to Ogham script found in the Americas. Quote, "Emigration from Kerry to the United States might be a far older tradition than previously thought. New research suggests that a tribe of Irish people lived side by side with Native Americans, neighboring communities in what is today the Carolinas and Georgia, long before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. The research took a more specific turn, however, when comparisons were made between a mysterious rock carving found on a farm in Georgia and carvings found on the Dingle Peninsula. When researchers compared the puzzling glyphs and concentric marks on the famous Reinhardt boulder with rock carvings on Ireland's Atlantic coast, they found the closest match on the Dingle Peninsula." End quote. The following comes to us from Mike McCormack of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. Quote, "Ogham writing and did the Dark Ages produce America's first Christmas cards? In 1982, archaeologist Dr. Robert Pyle investigated a petroglyph or rock carving in Wyoming County, West Virginia. Many such carvings exist whose origins are shrouded in mystery, but Pyle thought this one unique for the carving that looked like early runic writing. He likendated it as having been carved between 500 and 700 AD. He recorded every detail of the carving in 18 separate visits and gave the story to a local newspaper. A reader clipped the article and sent it to the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce, which published it in their periodical, Wonderful West Virginia. A copy of the magazine was sent to Ida Jane Gallagher, a native West Virginian working as a freelance writer in Connecticut. She saw a similarity between the carving and one she had photographed in New England, and she contacted the editor for more information. She was invited to visit the petroglyph. In November 1982, Robert Pyle led her up a steep bank to a rock ledge, where Miss Gallagher took her first look at the 10-foot-long inscription carved on a recessed portion of the cliff face beneath a natural rock overhang. She was convinced that it was a major find and contacted Harvard professor Barry Fell, an expert on ancient epigraphic inscriptions and president of the International Epigraphic Society. When Dr. Fell saw the carving, he recognized it as Ogham, an ancient Celtic script he had studied in Ireland. He agreed to a translation. He translated the Ogham into Old Irish, from Old Irish into Modern Irish, and then into English. When the message was deciphered, it became obvious that its validity would be easy to confirm. It read, "A ray will graze the notch on the left side at the time of sunrise on Christmas Day, the first season of the year, the season of the blessed advent of the Savior, Lord Christ. Behold, he is born of Mary, a woman. It was deciphered to verify the accuracy of the translation by visiting the carving in December. In ancient times, Christmas was celebrated around the winter solstice, so a small group met at the Petroglyph on the night of December 21st, 1982. Quietly, they waited as the dawn sun climbed behind them to a height where it spilled over the mountains and streamed its rays toward the cliff face before them. They watched in amazement as the first shaft of sunlight funneled through a previously unnoticed notch in the cliff overhang, and like a flashlight beam, struck the dead center of a sun symbol at the left end of the panel. Since the sun rises in a slightly different spot each morning, its rays directly hit that sunspot at no other time of year. Transfixed, they watched the beam expand as the sun rose, pushing the shadow from left to right, slowly bathing the entire message in sunlight like a prehistoric neon sign, announcing yet another Christmas as it had done for centuries.
The date is pulled out of the astronomy, and the astronomy verifies the inscription. Those two things make this unique. We have nothing like it anywhere in the country that I'm aware of.
Gruan si mi tuayon, jes ame mi chudele. This is Old Gaelic, and we're guessing at the vowels because the vowels aren't written.
It goes on to translate, the sun is 6 months in the pleasant north, in the gloomy south for the other months.
As the nose pointer shadow crosses the upper stem line on equinox, the forehead of the shadow above aligns with the first of 13 notches inside an eyebrow-like petroglyph.
They draw a line, as they did in the Book of Ballymote, a late 14th century manuscript, which explains and translates the Ogham. As a matter of fact, it shows different types of Ogham.
This may be some of the most important artifacts found in our time in America. And these are artifacts. They're man-made objects left behind as a result of their cultural activity.
The more we learn, the more we know that in ancient times people traveled all over the world, and their ships were excellent.
The U.S. Geological Survey came to investigate the cracked cave's archaeoastronomy. A break in the clouds on the eastern horizon allowed only a brief sunlit observation shortly after sunrise.
We're getting more sun. I can see the disk. We got a sun disk.
Yes, that is gorgeous.
We never know when we look at one of these sites for sure that what we're seeing was intended, but I think this is a fairly convincing site in terms of the interplay of the sunlight on the petroglyphs.
The light being focused on that area and the petroglyphs being within that area indicates that it most likely was put there with that purpose because of the time of the year and this day being equinox.
I can radiocarbon date the rock varnish, the dark coating that forms on rocks. That provides calibration, and at the same time with the same sample, I determine the chemistry of it.
Based on the lab results, Dr. Dorn dates the tree Ogham to 900 BC and the Noble Twins inscription to 1000 BC.
The image of the two suns and the god sitting between the two suns, so the god is sitting at the point of the equinox. That's the position of Mithras.
To understand ourselves, we have to understand history, and we are looking at history here.
Before their eyes, they had received a Christmas message across the ages. Here was a message that was definitely Christian, carved in the 6th century and carved in Ogham, a cipher used at that time only by the Irish. Shortly after publishing their remarkable find, the investigative team learned of another petroglyph at Horse Creek in nearby Boone County. This one was larger than the first. Dr. Fell called it a sensational find. He believed it to be the world's largest Ogham message and dated it between the 6th and 8th century. This 3-line message, when deciphered, read, quote, "A happy season is Christmas, a time of joy and goodwill to all people." The second line read, "A virgin was with child. God ordained her to conceive and be fruitful. Behold, a miracle." The third line read, "She gave birth to a son in a cave. The name of the cave was the Cave of Bethlehem. His foster father gave him the name Jesus, the Christ, Alpha and Omega, festive season of prayer." End quote. We may never know the names of those who carved these messages, but their existence provides important proof of an old claim. It has long been known that in the 6th century, Irish monks sailed to distant lands to spread the gospel, and a monk named Brendan wrote of his travels to North America. But the lack of hard evidence made skeptics call his story legend. In 1977, author Timothy Severin duplicated St. Brendan's voyage in a leather-covered curragh, or Irish sailing boat, built to Brendan's specifications, just to prove that it could have been done. Yet, still the skeptics argued that possibility and probability are not proof.
100 miles out in the North Atlantic, a small open boat runs for her life before a force 9 gale. A boat from another century. A boat made of leather. On board, 5 men risk cold, discomfort, and their lives. Their purpose? To pursue a legend. Around the North Atlantic lies a chain of islands that form stepping stones to the New World. And along them, a week before, the leather boat and her crew had set their course. The legend that drew them tells how a 6th century Irish abbot, St. Brendan, made a great voyage from Ireland past many other islands to a vast land far across the sea. Could he have reached America 900 years before Columbus? To test this theory, in a replica of his boat was the object of the Brendan voyage. The early Christian Irish were famous as great seafarers. On this stone pillar is a carving of one of their boats, an open boat which 4 men row, while a 5th holds a steering paddle. Today, the descendant of this ancient craft is still in use as a fishing skiff off Western Ireland. The curragh, its wooden hull covered with tarred canvas. Both curragh and carving point to the shape of St. Brendan's boat, but the legend said it was skinned with hide, weak stuff to face an ocean. Yet testing did hold out some hope. Drummed in brine, flexed and rolled, then torn apart, a leather tanned in oak bark, as in St. Brendan's time, retains its strength where modern rivals fail. At Josiah Croggan's tannery in Cornwall, ground-up oak bark is still steeped in water to make the tanning liquor where ox hides lie for months on end to produce a leather just as in St. Brendan's day. For their boats, the Irish wrote how they then dressed their leather with grease. But they did omit one detail. Greased ox hides stink. Timber for masts and oars, steering paddle, and the wooden frame of a leather boat in St. Brendan's day would have been cut from hand-picked Irish oak and ash. To build his replica of St. Brendan's boat for the modern voyage, historian and explorer Tim Severin had devoted several years to a close study of the early Irish, their voyages, boats and building materials.
Very good one. What you want, especially for masts, you want something that'll be very subtle.
Yeah,
quickly.
Yeah, we do well.
You know, very. This is what you'll want. The north side of it.
Yes.
The rings are a little bit narrower, closer together here than they are on the south side, the sunny side. So for any of the better quality pieces, yes, we will try and take the motor the north side.
At a boatyard near Cork, a unique hull took shape. Its slender ribs of ash hooped between oak gunwales like the rib cage of a stranded whale. The loose frame would be lashed together with leather thongs. Here, George Maloney joined the project, Tim's first choice for crew as sailing master.
Are we running out of those thicker ones, George?
Yeah,
thicker
we are,
ones.
Yeah.
Do you find that they're stretching enough when you do that? When you're pulling on them?
The job was back-breaking. Day after day, they crouched inside the wooden skeleton, poking and groping for slippery strips of leather, then heaving the knots tight until their muscles ached. 2 miles of leather secured the frame with 1,600 knots.
Slides up.
Now came the most crucial stage of all, the outer skin of hide. To stitch it, they used threads of hand-rolled flax, another raw material from St. Brendan's day. To show them how came John O'Connell, harness maker. O'Connell also oversaw the cutting of the 49 ox hides needed, fitting them neatly around the contours of the wooden frame.
The next one now, we'll get to straighten that right up to nothing there. Okay. The next hide will come over in line with this. 2 rows stitching here, 2 rows here,
And that
double
gives,
stitching.
That gives the double thickness of leather.
Double thickness of leather
on the bow.
On the bow.
A master saddler from Birmingham showed how to drive an awl straight and true, to follow through with the needle before the hole closed up, then pull the thread taut with a snap. The task was immense. 23 miles of thread were needed and 30,000 stitches, all by hand.
I don't want to put too much grease on.
Every seam was coated with wool grease to seal the stitch holes. And a 4-inch skid of oak was put in place to protect the leather skin should the boat ever run aground. At last, on January the 24th, 1976, the replica medieval boat was ready to be launched. Tim's wife, Dorothy, brought their 4-year-old daughter, Ida, to christen the boat with whiskey. Irish whiskey, for a very Irish occasion. After a blessing by St. Brendan's spiritual descendant, the Bishop of Kerry.
My dear friends, as we gather this morning to bless this boat, we must be repeating something that St. Brendan and his companions must equally have done when he set out on his voyage. There are few places in the world or in life where one feels so much alone as in the sea and so much a creature. And so it is very right that at the beginning of such a voyage as these people are undertaking, that we should ask the God of the land and the sea to bless their boat and to bless them. Let us pray. Hear, O Lord, our prayer, and bless with your right hand this boat and all who sail in it. Send your angel from heaven to keep them safe from every danger, and after a tranquil voyage, may they land and be united in joy once again with their loved ones. We ask you this through Jesus Christ, our Lord.
What are you going to say?
My name is Brendan.
Go to Galway.
She had never been out of sight of land until then, and the first time she really went out of sight of land was as the victim of a quite strong gale. I made certain mental notes. One of the most important was never to put to sea in a medieval boat without the stores and particularly the water to face at least 2 weeks, because one can be driven offshore 2 weeks away from gaining land and fresh water again. And in a medieval boat, you have to have that leeway of survival.
36 feet long on an 8-foot beam, Brendan offered little comfort to the men facing weeks aboard her. Arthur McGann, the youngest crew member.
It's like living in a tent, living in the cabin of that boat, except that there were 3 of us in there. That is very cramped. You've got to get in and out of sleeping bags, get clothes in and off. You've got to be very nice to everybody around you.
Tim Severin.
Certain things acquired enormous importance. Obviously, the question of keeping something dry and warm. One was absolutely religious about folding up and stowing the dry hat, the dry sweater, the dry socks, at whatever cost.
George Maloney.
The most difficult thing to get used to was being so cramped, not being able to move around, and having just to climb over everything. You know, there were no gangways, nothing like that.
With cramp came sickness, as Brendan's supple hull flexed to the shape of each wave.
In the first couple of weeks, I was very sick, because she rose incredibly. The phenomenal stink of the hides didn't help at all.
But stomachs soon settled, and as they sailed north, the crew learned the measure of their boat's performance. George Maloney, sailing master.
We were very fortunate in that we had some very nice winds for the next few days, when we reckoned that we were achieving a height of perhaps 9 knots. 9 knots is a very good speed for a medieval boat at any time. This was with a following wind and quite a big sea running at the time, but it proved that we could really sail her fast.
What's the log?
83.4.
Wind?
Southwest 3.
Southwest 3? Yes. Fine. Thanks.
Arthur, nicknamed Boots after his favourite footwear, took on the job of voyage photographer as Brendan nosed her way up Scotland's Western Isles. St Brendan is known to have come to Iona. He visited St Columba here, who founded the island's first abbey church, bringing Christianity to the pagan north of Britain. Today, St Columba's doves still strut by the mound where the saint first built his cell, and beneath the ancient cross that later appeared on Brendan's flaxen sails. From Iona, they ran north again, towards the Faroe Islands. A new face had appeared on board, Eden Keneal, to bring their numbers back to strength. It was 4 weeks now since they'd left Brandon Creek, and the leather boat was holding up well. Her hull showed no sign of collapsing as she surged along at speeds that would do credit to a modern cruising yacht. St Brendan had sailed north from Scotland to a place he called the Island of Sheep. Island of Sheep in ancient Norse is Faroes. On June 24th, Brendan sighted Faroes. A sudden gale swept her towards dark cliffs where seething tidal races could dash her to a pulp. Under full sail to clear the tides, Brendan swept into Faroes at more than 10 knots. From his Island of Sheep, St Brendan said he could look across a narrow sound to an island called the Paradise of Birds. Today, the Faroes are as famous for their sheep as ever, and seabirds still nest there in vast colonies. On July 3rd, Brendan sailed from Faroes to attempt the 700 miles of open ocean to Iceland against prevailing winds. Faroes had given her crew a new member, Trondur Patterson, who taught them the hunting traditions of the northern seas. He showed how to catch seabirds for fresh meat, first luring them with whale blubber, then using it to bait a hook. The seabird's greed was Brendan's gain. Well boiled, fried, then sauced, seagull looked and tasted rather like pigeon. 3 days out of Faroes, St. Brendan's legend surfaced once again. The legend tells how Brendan and his monks beached on a barren island to cook a meal. But as their pot heated, the island heaved and moved away, leaving the monks to scramble in terror for their boat. This was no island, said the saint, but the great fish Jasconius, one of the wonders of God's creation. What else was Jasconius, if not a whale? Magnified maybe as a wonder by the ancient Irish, but a whale, drawn then as now to a leather boat bobbing in his sea. Crouched in his tiny berth, Tróndur spent every free moment sketching the daily scenes around him. On July 12th came their first contact with the outside world since leaving Faroes. A searching Coast Guard plane from Iceland had spotted the tiny medieval boat. In 9 days, Brendan had run 600 miles from Faroes. Now she lay just off the southwest tip of Iceland. The Icelanders, seagoing themselves, flocked to Reykjavik's harbour in welcome, for a boat from their own distant past. On arrival, she was beached for thorough inspection. Her hull was in better condition than even her crew had expected. Crusted, of course, with algae and barnacles, but showing not one sign of rot. To check her stitching, the crew scraped off her protective layer of wool grease, which critics had claimed would long since have washed away.
But it's very well adhered, the grease. There's no doubt.
The brief northern sailing season was over. Re-greased, Brendan was stored in a Coast Guard aircraft hangar. Next spring would come her greatest challenge, the long run to America.
Today, the West Virginia petroglyphs provide irrefutable evidence of religious messages left on those shores between 500 and 800 AD by Irish Christian missionaries. And each year, at Yuletide, the rising sun places a fresh stamp of authenticity on America's first Christmas cards. Verification. Years after I had written the story of the Wyoming County petroglyphs, I continued to follow the progress of Dr. Pyle and his team of archaeologists. Soon, the story of the American Ogham stones brought more and more similar carvings to their attention. Dr. Pyle even visited Ireland to examine examples of Ogham in its native environment. As I continued to occasionally document the discoveries, I received a number of photos of a strikingly similar petroglyph from a friend in County Kerry, Ireland. They were taken near the exact area from which St. Brendan and his monks had sailed. The petroglyph is atop Cahir Mountain, outside of Kenmare in Lawrig Parish. Like so many historical artifacts and relics of antiquity in Ireland, locals knew of its existence and referred to it as Connacht na Scribe, the hill of the writing, but had long ago forgotten of its significance. These photos fit into my research like the pieces of an ancient jigsaw puzzle. I stared at them for hours. To the best of my knowledge, they have not been translated, or if they have, the translation is not readily available. I profusely thanked the photographer, but when I asked him if he intended to return to shoot any more pictures, he informed me that since it took more than an hour of hard climbing to get to the petroglyph, if I wanted any more pictures, I would have to take them myself. Since the discoveries of the Wyoming and Boone County petroglyphs, 11 more nearby carvings in West Virginia have been identified as Ogham and are presently under investigation. They fall at varying distances apart on both sides of an ancient natural mountaintop trail created by wind and weather, called Indian Ridge. The trail was used by early natives and animals stretching from Pennsylvania to the Ohio River, which was another major travel artery in ancient times. We know that early Irish missionary monks took to the sea to spread their nets for God, but we know neither how many nor how far they ventured on their mission. The work of the Irish monks who sailed east to Europe is well documented, but how many went west or south? Judging by the complexity and number of petroglyphs in West Virginia alone, there must have been an armada headed for America. Celtic scholars have declared the West Virginia petroglyphs as important to Celtic history as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yet who has heard of them, and why not? Happy Christmas, brothers, and rejoice in the fact that we have the heritage we do. And don't forget that on December 21st, the lights go on again in Newgrange, and that's another story. End quote.
Colorado's Ogham controversy began with these grooves discovered in 1975. They were found by Dr. Don Rickey, chief historian for the Bureau of Land Management, while hiking near the site of an 1868 Indian battle which killed an ancestor in the U.S. cavalry. Having read Barry Fell's America, B.C., Rickey felt these marks resembled Ogham in Scotland, but archaeologists soon conspired to derail Rickey's excitement and squash any connection to the Old World. Indeed, this isolated example is crude, perhaps a Native American imitation of more distinctive Ogham nearby, found in the 1980s. Yet in the months after Rickey's explorations, his supervisor and the Colorado State archaeologist united to undermine suspicions by locating and recruiting highly opinionated academic allies. National Park Service archaeologist Wilfred Logan wrote to University of Edinburgh professor Stuart Piggott in the hunt for such an authority. Piggott suggested colleague Kenneth Jackson, with the warning, "Any reply he may vouchsafe will be explosive," and the footnote, "I've just seen him, and I'm right." In appealing to Dr. Jackson's sensitivities, Dr. Logan then confessed his concerns if the sensationalized claims concerning certain grooves in the sandstone cliffs go unrefuted, and if further publicity appears in the popular press. Regarding Barry Fell and other advocates of Ogham in America, Jackson said, "Their theories are of course totally untenable, and in your own word, preposterous. And I have written every time to tell them so, but without effect it seems." Jackson ended his letter suggesting Logan also contact Harvard professor Calvert Watkins for further ammunition. Logan apparently passed along Jackson's critique and Watkins' name to fellow skeptic and Colorado State archaeologist Dr. Bruce Ripetoe. A staffer then solicited written remarks from both men. Watkins' letter was waived by a defiant archaeologist in a televised debate 8 years later, as if the matter was closed. Yet Watkins' knowledge of Ogham and its variants was shown to be inaccurate, in his own words and illustrations. Before the flurry of correspondence from and to his office, state archaeologist Ripetoe joined a July 1977 site survey and rejected the theory that this is Ogham script. Nonetheless, the site was nominated to the National Register of Historic Places, assuming Native Americans did the carving. These presumptions hold even today, although much clearer examples of translated Ogham verified by archaeoastronomy have been found nearby, such as in Crack Cave. The Denver Post reported in September 2005, these are carvings Plains Indians created maybe 700 years ago to mark the equinoxes. The Post reporter later told us a Forest Service archaeologist told her that studies had concluded this. But when asked to see them, Comanche National Grasslands District Forest Service Ranger Thomas Peters said no such studies existed. Seems archaeologists consider preservation a sacred trust, especially when it comes to preserving their own dogma.
Mainstream archaeology categorically rejects these American Ogham rock inscriptions as authentic because they're inscribed on flat surfaces. In Ireland, ancient Ogham is generally found along the edges of stone pillars. British archaeologist Keith Fitzpatrick Matthews, best known for online rants at badarchaeology.com, which conforms to mainstream archaeology's thinking, puts it bluntly, quote, "To see scratches on a flat rock surface as Ogham goes against everything we know about the real thing. This is not speculation on my part. These are the uncomfortable facts for anyone who wants to believe in Fell's supposed Ogham," unquote.
This is Old Gaelic, and we're guessing at the vowels because the vowels aren't written.
Barry Fell authored books challenging the collective beliefs of archaeology and linguistics that North America was isolated from contact by ancient sailors and explorers. Mainstream's public enemy number one died more than 2 decades ago. Fitzpatrick Matthews singles out Fell as the lone personality in his targeted attacks. My evidence demonstrates Keith is flat wrong about the absence of the flat style in the home of Ogham, Ireland's preferred pronunciation of Ogham in America.
McGillicuddy's Reeks, the eastern end.
My grandfather's people's family tried to take the stone away as 'twas an obstruction for cultivation in the field. So they dug down as deep as the stone stands above the ground, and 'twas still going down. So they quit and filled in the hole.
Outstanding in his field, landowner Tom on the 13th of May, 1988. This magnificent standing Olmstone was spotted off the roadside in the rural Killabunane district near the border of counties Kerry and Cork. I had parked in Tom's drive to ask for a closer look. This tribute was inscribed along an imaginary vertical stem line of about 50 inches in length. The stone pillar appears to be a memorial honoring Otten Maciwethe in Gaelic, Otten, son of Sweden, in English. Had Ireland's historical preservation authorities taken notice of this monumental stone and its Ogham inscriptions? I asked the gracious landowner.
Public Works.
Public Works. Never took any interest in that.
Well, I got a clue for you because that's an unusual style.
Yeah.
And the style, many archaeologists say, well, that's a forgery because it's not on the edge of a stone. It's not written on the edge of a stone.
Yeah.
See, most of the tombstones, most of the gallones are written with the stem line that you have here on the sides, you know? And they use that stem line and then cut through it like that. And there's another one near the Gap of Dunlow that I pointed out to their attention, and they didn't take much interest in that one either. And it was lying, there were 7 Ogham stones like this standing up in a semicircle, and the one with the flat inscription was lying on the ground, and the tourists were scattering pea gravel on it and ruining it. Katie and I were just there the other day, and the stone's been removed.
Yeah.
So at least it's not being damaged anymore. But you see, you have your little vowels here too. They're just these points. In America, we don't have the vowels. We just have the consonants. We just have the consonants.
They have the cross lines in it. We don't have the dots.
See, and this is all implied stem line because we have a groove that goes right through it.
Oh, yeah.
The one up in Dunmanway had a center groove. It just went right through the center of the inscription. But here it's implied. That's good.
In 1988, this was a bed and breakfast in Dunmanway, County Cork.
And through that gateway, You walk a little ways to find the very special Ogham stone right there, covered with moss. At the very top of this rock, there are some very shallow scorings right through here, almost they could be natural, although they feel pretty sharp. They're a little thinner than these. But we basically have one inscription of 11-inch stem line here, one inscription of a 14-inch stem line here, with an 8-pointed star at the beginning, and an 8-pointed star alone by itself without any further inscriptions down here. One of the inscriptions runs like this, and the others like this. They're both very good examples of flat Ogham. We're looking off in the direction toward Bantry Bay. And that's the stone. Very, very fine example of flat Ogham in Ireland. It's 1, 2, 3, 1 down, 2 across, and 1 across, 2 across, 1 up, 2 up, 3 up, 1 cross, 1, 2, 3, 4 down. This is the pillar stone in Hawkinstown. It used to stand upright. We believe it has toppled over end for end. And I'll zoom in on what appears to be, from our observation, the irregular Ogham. It's obvious that this Ogham was not carved on the edge, but along an implied stem line on the face. And it may continue into the water. We don't know how much more of the stone is submerged. It's Hawkinstown off N2. This is the face of the Rathkenny stone, north of Rathkenny in County Meath. And the inscription begins down here. The whole face of the rock has Ogham on it.
After this blustery visit to the partially collapsed dolmen in January 1987, I returned the next year in May.
The light is pretty good. These are cup and circle marks inside one of the support stones at Rathkenny. They're beautiful. They really are lovely.
At the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin, many fine artifacts are curated and on display. Others are in storage in the museum's crypt below street level. Among the antiquities displayed is this silver-bossed penannular brooch from Ballyspellin in County Kilkenny, dated to the 9th century. This clasp once decorated a woman's shoulder. On the other side, a silver lining, finely etched with at least 3 detailed flat Ogham inscriptions, difficult to make out in detail in this zoomed into the Max 1987 video through glass.
So I could be back at 2.
You'll be back at 2, yeah. Because I'll be tied up shortly.
All right.
And because it's down the stairs, we have to have somebody else. We have to have somebody in there.
This is in the crypt or the basement of the National Museum in Dublin. These are Ogham stones that are not on display presently. This stone is similar to the Ballintaggart stones. It's a round stone. 1/1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This one may all go all the way through. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the one that's westernmost. This is looking north from the Ballintaggart stones. The southeasternmost stone we're about to look at. That's it. Notice the cross on the top of the stone. This is the southwesternmost stone, and the westernmost stone behind it.
8 large rounded stones are neatly arranged in a circumference around a central stone, each with vertical grooves.
This is the Kilcolman site, we're shooting it from the southwest. Sun is to the northwest. It's an example of flat Ogham. It runs up the side, continues around on the top, and angles down on the bottom. This is part of the stone circle at Kilcolman. That is the stone circle, and it's quite wide in diameter, probably about 30, 40 yards. And we're looking at it from the north. The sun is in the northwest, and that's Ventry Harbor down there. So you can see that the Kilcolman stone circle is about 2 miles north-northeast of Ventry, town of Ventry, on the Dingle Peninsula.
The Dermania Grania stands in glory, but in the past this county Tyrone dolmen in Castledurg came to a violent and sudden end. Under the caprock, somewhat sheltered, is what appears to be the terminus of a flat Ogham inscription, but as the camera zooms out, other grooves appear along the edge, topside only. It's likely the collapse sheared a thin, inch or two thick veneer from the face of this once vertical support stone and disappeared as small stones. These ruins are on the high end of a field, just beyond the hospital in the town of Castledurg. Given the evidence, and using some deductive reasoning, I'm confident our family of flat Ogham inscriptions in Ireland welcomes this candidate too.
Here we are in the County Clare. It's a long, long way from here to there. It's a long, long way from there to here.
You have to have a shaky voice to match the video.
It's a long, long way. It gets farther every day. It's a long, long way from there to here. Here we go.
At the southern foot of Mount Callan is Bullinagriana Lake, and just above it, on a hillside, a stone with flat Ogham inscriptions sensationalized in the first volume of the Transactions of the Royal Irish Academy.
The Mount Callan inscription is 200 yards north of this lake, uphill to this site. It's lying on its back, probably. Same stone from the other side looking down. Seems to give the grooves better definition.
In 1788, the RIA published Discoverer Theophilus O'Flanagan's report of 3 years earlier. Among schoolmaster John Lloyd's translations, beneath this lies Conan the fierce and nimble-footed. The reference is possibly to a great member of the legendary Fianna clan. Another translation, long let him be at ease on the brink of this lake, that never saw his faithful clan depressed. 84 years later, Sir Samuel Ferguson dismissed the Conan Ogham in another RIA publication, citing the Ogham's rarity, if not uniqueness, in all of County Clare. But in the early 1900s, Irish Ogham cataloguer and professor of Celtic archaeology at University College Dublin, R.A. Stewart McAllister, renewed the acceptance of a wider body of evidence as authentic, with variations allowed. Obstructionists reign in the field of archaeology, not knowing what they don't know. Fitzpatrick Matthews indignantly dismisses his team's whipping boy, while, as an online archaeological authority, propagating falsehoods about Ogham to the public. Let's close with Dr. Fell's take on Ogham epigraphy and its telltale roots.
The origin of it is very different from what the Encyclopedia Britannica will tell you, or what archaeologists who commonly quote that source of information will tell you. The Encyclopedia says it was invented in London about the 4th century AD by people who knew Latin. And that's just sheer guesswork and turns out to be quite unreliable. We have inscriptions from Britain which archaeologists date back to 2200 BC, written in Ogham without vowels, in the form of a little amulet that somebody wore in the vicinity of Stonehenge, people called the Windmill Hill people who built Stonehenge. One of their members wore an amulet begging the protection of the mother goddess Bianu. The language is Celtic. The goddess Bianu is Celtic, the mother goddess, Celtic mother goddess. The date is 2200 BC, and that's the oldest example of Ogham we know of.
The following comes to us from Brent Cooper. Is it true that Irish monks landed in America before Columbus? Some believe they did. 50 years after the death of St. Patrick on March 17, 461 AD, another Celtic saint continued the work of converting pagan Ireland to Christianity. Born near Tralee in County Kerry in 484 AD, Saint Brendan the Navigator traveled tirelessly to evangelize and establish monasteries following his ordination to the priesthood at age 28. The 6th century monk frequently sailed the high seas to spread the gospel throughout Ireland, as well as to Scotland, Wales, and Brittany in the north of France. According to a 1,500-year-old Irish tale, however, Saint Brendan embarked on one particularly epic journey in the winter of his 93-year-old life. According to the story, Saint Berinthus told Saint Brendan that he had just returned from a visit to paradise, a land that lurked far beyond the horizon. For 40 days, Saint Brendan fasted and prayed atop a mountain on the rugged Dingle Peninsula, a spindly finger of land on the west of Ireland that points directly at North America. The octogenarian squinted out at the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean in wonder of what was out there before deciding to go in pursuit of the fabled Garden of Eden. Saint Brendan crafted a traditional Irish round-bottom boat, shaped like a canoe and called a carrack, with square sails and leather skins stitched together to create a watertight seal over the vessel's wooden skeleton. Along with a crew of anywhere between 18 and 150, according to the differing accounts, the saint sailed off into the cobalt ocean. As the fragile craft beat against the waves, Saint Brendan encountered towering crystal pillars afloat in the oceans, sheep the size of oxen, giants who pelted the ship with fireballs that smelled like rotten eggs, and talking birds singing psalms. Finally, as the boat drifted through a fog, it landed at what the Irishman thought was paradise, a land lush with vegetation, fragrant with flowers and abounding in fruit and colorful stones. After staying for 40 days, an angel told the man to return home. When Saint Brendan came back to the Emerald Isle after the 7-year voyage, pilgrims who heard the sensational story flocked to his side in remote County Kerry until he died around 577 AD. Much like with St. Patrick, the line between the history and legend surrounding St. Brendan has been blurred. The account of his voyage passed from lip to lip for generations, until a 9th century Irish monk finally put it to paper in a Latin text entitled Navigatio Sancti Brendani, The Voyage of St. Brendan. The book was among the biggest page-turners of the Middle Ages, and became so widely known that cartographers began to include paradise, recorded as St. Brendan's Isle, or St. Brendan's Island, on maps. Christopher Columbus was aware of the elusive island, which was drawn everywhere from the southwest of Ireland to near the Canary Islands off the African coast, as he embarked on his own voyage across the Atlantic in 1492. Most scholars consider the Voyage of St. Brendan to simply be a religious allegory, but some believe that the tale was based on an actual voyage, albeit with some Irish embellishment. When Columbus and succeeding explorers failed to find the mythical island drawn on their maps, a new theory arose that perhaps St. Brendan and his crew had actually sailed clear across the Atlantic, and that paradise was in fact North America. Proponents pointed to the Scandinavian sagas that mentioned that the Irish had already visited North America by the time the Vikings landed there around 1000 AD. the Vikings referred to the land south of their settlement in Vinland as Irland, it Mikla, or Greater Ireland. In addition to the fantastical sights encountered by St. Brendan, although exaggerated, could be matched to actual stopovers between Ireland and North America on a similar North Atlantic route taken by the Vikings. The Crystal Pillars could be icebergs. The Faroe Islands are home to large sheep and a chorus of squawking birds. And the foul-smelling fireballs could correlate to the sulfuric dioxide spewed by Iceland's volcanoes, minus the giants. But would a transatlantic voyage have even been possible in the 6th century? In 1976, modern-day adventurer Tim Severin attempted to answer the question. Based on the description of the Curragh in the text, he crafted an identical vessel and cast off from the Dingle Peninsula with 4 fellow explorers in the shadow of the same mountain where St. Brendan had been enraptured in prayer prior to his voyage, now named Mount Brandon in the saint's honor. Following the prevailing winds across the northernmost part of the Atlantic Ocean, they crossed it using landing points such as the Aran Islands, the Hebrides, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland as stepping stones before arriving in Newfoundland. Everything described in the Voyage of St. Brendan could be complete blarney. But for centuries, numerous scholars also discounted the Vikings' sagas of their voyages to the New World as legends. That all changed with the discovery of a Viking settlement on the northernmost tip of Newfoundland in 1960. The following comes to us from Darren Brithnick. Forgive my pronunciation. Quote, "The thing is, the Irish did emigrate to South and Central America in strong numbers and have a strong history on the continent. In 1477, Christopher Columbus arrived in Galway for a sailing trip and learned new skills to help him adapt. While there, he visited St. Nicholas's Church in Galway and met a young Galwegian known as William Herries. This William Herries would join Columbus on his trip to the New World with the Portuguese name Guillermo Herries, and became the first Irishman to make it to the New World. In the 16th century, England converted to Protestantism and passed several laws that discriminated against Catholics. Spain, which was seen as the protector of the Catholic faith, gave assurances to Irish Catholic nobles that their titles would be recognized in Spain, which saw many Irish emigrate to Spain and take part in their empire. The first recorded Irish arrivals in South America are Juan and Tomas Farrell, who joined Pedro de Mendoza in founding Buenos Aires in the Rio de la Plata region in 1536. This would just be the start of the Irish in South America. Following the 9 Years' War, War of the Three Kingdoms, and the Williamite War in the 17th century, many Catholic Irishmen emigrated to Spain and France to join the military, business, and religious orders to get ahead. Many of these exiles would go on to take on a leading role in the military. One of these exiles was Felix Berenguer de Marquina, who served as Viceroy of New Spain from April 30th, 1800 to January 4th, 1803. His administration dealt with British and American smugglers to Mexico, as well as a failed Indian uprising. His administration also saw women gain access to more decent jobs than what was allowed by ordinances. Another major political figure was Juan de O'Donoghue y O'Ryan, who served as the last Viceroy of New Spain. Born in Seville to an Irish family, O'Donoghue served with distinction in the Peninsular War, acting as an interpreter between Gregoria Garcia de la Cuesta and the British commander. Lieutenant General Sir Arthur Wellesley. After the war, he was appointed Spanish Viceroy of New Spain on the 21st of July, 1821. Upon getting to Mexico, the region was in the middle of a civil war. He would meet with the rebel general, Agustin de Iturbide, to secure stability in Mexico. Through his role as viceroy, O'Donoghue was able to get the military to stand down and leave Mexico, which would lead to the rebels capturing the city the next day. On the 27th of September, 1821, O'Donoghue declared independence from Spain and signed the Act of Independence on the 28th. He would briefly serve in the provisional government under Iturbide until his death on the 8th of October. The Irish weren't just limited to the military, as Irish missionaries educated in Spain and France would join the missionary crusade to convert the natives to Catholicism. One of these missionaries was Limerick man Thomas Fields. Fields would arrive in Brazil around 1577. With 2 other priests, he would establish missions for the Guarani people in Paraguay. Another major figure was William Lamport, better known as Guillaume de Lampart. Lampart was an Irish Catholic born in Wexford to a merchant family. While in London, he handed out pamphlets for Catholicism, which led him to be detained before he was able to escape to Spain. He spent a few years in Spain and France, fighting in the siege of La Rochelle against the Huguenots. While in Spain, he had formed a premarital relationship with Ana de Cano y Laiva, who got pregnant. They lived together for a bit before they separated, and Lampart left for New Spain. The 1640s was a chaotic period as the Habsburgs lost their power in Portugal to João, Duke of Braganza. The then governor of Mexico was a relative of João, which saw Lampart hatch a plot to unite Indians, blacks, and Creole merchants in his rebellion. Before the plot started, Lampart told his plot to a captain, Mendez, who reported it to the Inquisition. Lampart was held for 17 years in prison before he was executed for his crimes. While in prison, he developed his ideas even more with drafting a Declaration of Independence, which, quote, promised land reform, equality of opportunity, racial equality, and a democratically elected monarch over a century before the French Revolution, end quote. He is regarded as a national hero in Mexico. Besides Mexico, the most prominent Irish community in South America is in Argentina. Argentina is home to the 5th largest Irish community in the world. The most important Irish Argentine would have to be William Brown, an Irish-born officer who would serve as Admiral of the Argentina Navy in Argentina's fight for independence. For his service, he is regarded as one of Argentina's national heroes. Another major Irish immigrant was Patrick Lynch, who was a prominent landowner in Rio de la Plata. Patrick was born in 1715 in Galway to Irish parents. In 1740, he emigrated to Bilbao before traveling to Rio de la Plata, where he was appointed royal representative. Through his wife, Rosa de Galén y de la Camara, he had many notable descendants, which included Estanislao Lynch, an Argentine officer who helped liberate Chile. Another descendant was Nicolás Barrios Lynch, an Argentine educator and supporter of expanding rural libraries in South America. The most well-known descendant was Ernesto Guevara, better known as Che Guevara. Guevara was the 4th great-grandson of Patrick Lynch. Ernesto Guevara Lynch, the father of Che Guevara, noted that Che's, quote, restless nature could be traced to the blood of the Irish rebels which flowed through his son's veins. Irish community in the Caribbeans. Most of the Irish community in the Caribbean can be traced back to the end of the War of the Three Kingdoms. Following the war, Irish political prisoners were transported to the Caribbean on orders by Oliver Cromwell to solve the Irish question and helping cement England's control of the region. After the end of the Commonwealth and the restoration of Charles II, most Irish immigration was by choice, as the Caribbean was going through a sugar boom, and these immigrants could make a good life for themselves. This history has led the Caribbean to be home to several unique Irish communities. One of these unique communities is in Jamaica. Around 25% of Jamaicans have some form of Irish ancestry. The most prominent Irish Jamaican is Alexander Bustamante, the first Prime Minister of Jamaica, and Michael Manley, one of Jamaica's most popular Prime Ministers.
What is your name?
What kind of question you ask me? You don't know my name long time already. We can't put my name on the internet, girl. What's wrong with you?
Where are you from?
I come from Jamaica. We come from the western part of Jamaica. We can't really tell you where we come from down there though, because we don't know where we come from.
What kind of food do you like to eat?
Well, I like all kind of food. Anything they make in Jamaica, I like ackee and saltfish. A piece of fried pork in it. Can't beat that. I really love a curry goat with rice. I don't like rice and peas though, but I love curry goat and rice. And well, I don't use so much bami, but I love bami too. The more I think about it, I love goat belly soup. And my mother used to make hog food, but since I live abroad, I don't get that no more. I love any kind of Jamaican food.
What's your favorite thing about Jamaica?
My favorite thing about Jamaica is the sunshine. Can't beat that. Nice and warm. You don't really get no cold weather down there. And the people. Jamaican people are the warmest, kind-hearted people in the whole world. You can meet anybody on the street, just chat to them, and they talk to you. They don't really care who you are, where you come from, what you look like. And well, I mean, I know everything in Jamaica nice. I miss Jamaica, because I used to live there, I don't live there no more, but I love Jamaica.
Who's your favorite reggae artist?
Well, my favorite reggae artist from a long time ago, Yellowman. I remember Yellowman when he was big in the 80s when we used to live. No reggae artist can excite the crowd more than Yellowman. Once he go up on the stage, he mix it up with all in lyrics and in different styles. Blueberry Hill, Zungo Zungo Zuzin, whatever that one they call me, can't even pronounce it.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I don't know, because enough people watch this video and then probably wonder why may I put this on the internet. Well, my daughter born in Jamaica too, and she always bother me because she on the internet all the time, and I don't know, say she don't believe that enough people believe say white people come from Jamaica. The Jamaican motto is out of many, one people. So you got all different kind of people in Jamaica, and I'm just an example of, I guess.
You play an instrument?
Yeah. Can't believe I've never told you I play bass.
Really?
Oh yeah. I slap the bass big time.
What is that? You sound like a leprechaun.
No,
What is
that's
that?
a reggae guy. I just did reggae.
Doesn't sound.
It doesn't sound reggae?
No.
Slap the bass. How does it?
It's like big time, big time, big time.
Big time. Slap the bass, big time.
Mm,
Slap the bass. That sounded like Borat.
yeah,
Slap the bass, big time.
that's better.
The other unique Irish community in the Caribbeans is Montserrat. Montserrat has been described as the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean because of the Irish descent of the people in Montserrat and its resemblance to some parts of Ireland. Throughout Montserrat, there are several remnants of Irish culture. whether it be through the similarities of the Montserrat accent to the Irish accent, the week-long celebration of St. Patrick's Day to celebrate the slaves rising against the rich slave plantation order, as well as to celebrate the Irish ancestry of the many inhabitants. Of all Caribbean islands, Montserrat is probably the one impacted. Of all Caribbean islands, Montserrat is probably the one most impacted by the Irish diaspora. So while the Irish did not emigrate as much as they did to the US and UK, there was still a decent amount that emigrated to South and Central America." End quote.
For a relaxed, get-away-from-it-all holiday, visit Kinsale in the sunny southwest. Laze in a boat along its Atlantic shore, anchor at Fox's Bay, Roach's Bluff or Sweeney's Well, or just lounge in the shade of the tree-lined beaches. If you feel more energetic, you could always climb Fogarty's Hill or nearby Fergus Mountain. And for the really enterprising, there's a day trip up the Galway volcano. Or if you just want to take it easy, why not rent a holiday villa with its balcony looking west over the Atlantic? Yes, every taste is catered for in Holiday Kinsale.
Unfortunately, it's a bit far to take the wife and family. To be precise, 4,128 miles from Cork, give or take a few. It's on the Emerald Isle, all right, and they'll feel quite at home among its Atlantic beaches, green fields, harps and shamrocks. But the trouble is that this Kinsale is at the wrong side of the Atlantic. It's Kinsale in Montserrat, a West Indian island, the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, and home of a unique race of people, the Black Irish.
There's a spot in me heart which no Colleen may own. There's a depth in me soul never sounded unknown. There's a place in my memory, my life, that you fill. No one ever take it, no one ever will. Sure I love the dear silver that shines in your hair, and the brow that's all furrowed and wrinkled with care. I kiss the dear fingers so toil-worn for me. Oh, God bless you and keep you, Mother McCree.
There's much in Montserrat besides Mother McCree to remind Patrick Robert Riley of his ancestral home. Though now a British colony, evidence of Irish origins are as aggressive in Montserrat as in Boston or New York, and the harps and shamrocks are not just commercial emblems. The first 3 governors of Montserrat were Irish born, and the local police are proud of the Kathleen Ni Houlihan figure with harp and cross, which forms their coat of arms. So Montserrat makes quite a fuss of St. Patrick's Day, aided and abetted by Patrick Robert Riley.
Lately it has become quite a big day. The radio stations seem to devote almost the whole day to singing Irish songs, interviewing people about Irish customs and so on. And I usually have the honor of being called, because I usually go down to town dressed all in green on St. Patrick's Day. And, well, the folks actually look out and said, "Here comes Mr. St. Patrick's."
The title Emerald Isle of the Caribbean is given to Montserrat partly because of the lush green foliage of its countryside. The colour green is everywhere, on roofs, doors, notices and school uniforms. But there's a good deal more to the Irish connection than a mere identity of national colour. This is Standard 4 in the Infant Jesus preschool in Plymouth, Montserrat. The faces may not be terribly familiar to you, but I think some of the names will. Mrs. Catherine Ryan is the teacher. Mrs. Ryan, could I have a look at the list of names and see if I recognise some of them. There's Devon Riley, Sherlyn Ryan, Joanne Burke. Let's try some of the names. What's your name?
Eugene Fleming.
Eugene Fleming. Is that right?
Eugene Fleming.
Good man, Eugene. And what's yours?
Sean Castle.
Sean Castles. And what's yours?
Jerome Mead.
Jerome Mead. Is that it? Hmm?
Yeah.
Good man. Now let's try some of the girls. What's your name?
John Burke.
What is it?
John Burke.
Joanne Burke. Is that right? Good girl, Joanne. And what's yours?
Michelle Castle.
Michelle Castles. And what's your name?
Irish.
What's your first name again?
Colleen Irish.
Colleen, is it? Colleen Irish. Is that your name?
Yeah.
Good girl, Colleen. And what's your name?
Michael Ryan.
Michael Ryan. Well done. And what's your name?
Marianne Carty.
Marianne Carty. Is that it? Good girl, Marianne. And what's your name?
Sandra Farrell.
Sandra Farrell. In fact, well over half the names of the 13,000 people who now inhabit the island of Montserrat are distinctively Irish. In parts of the island, the proportion of Irish names would be as high as 9 out of 10. Apart from the more familiar Irish names, you also get words like Irish, Dublin, Cork, even Kinsale used as surnames, which would seem to make the Montserrat children more Irish than the Irish themselves.
The first Irish landed in Montserrat in 1632 at this bay, Kinsale Bay. The plantations just inland from here are still to this day known as Broderick's Estate, O'Gara's Estate and Galway Estate, and the little village just around that headland is St. Patrick's Village. Who were they, these first Irish settlers? Well, a group came out from Cork with names like Barry, Sullivan, Driscoll, Roach and Ryan, and they settled in the neighbouring island of St. Kitts, hoping to trade in tobacco there. But after a few months they had such violent rows with the English Puritans in St. Kitts that they left there for the smaller island of Montserrat, and they hoped peace.
It was the feeling of despair after the Battle of Kinsale which drove these first settlers out of Ireland. The name Kinsale was obviously prominent in their minds as they gave it to their first landing place in Montserrat. Andrew Power, who died in 1720 at the age of 56, may have been the son of one of those first adventurers who crossed the Atlantic to St. Kitts and thence to Montserrat.
A second group of Irish settlers arrived in Montserrat at about the same time as the St. Kitts evacuees, and they landed down there at Carr's Bay. They came from Virginia in America. Lord Baltimore was just crossing the Atlantic to organise his settlement of English Catholics in Maryland. He brought with him his chaplain, an English Jesuit, Father Andrew White. With typical Jesuitical industry, Father White kept a diary of the voyage. January 26th, 1633. By noon we came before the island of Montserrat, wherein is a noble plantation of Irish Catholics, whom the Virginians would not suffer to live with them because of their religion. So 2 groups of Irish came to Montserrat from places over 1,000 miles apart, in each case as victims of religious persecution.
For almost 10 years, these 2 groups of Irish settlers found peace. The high mountainous ridge down the centre of Montserrat gave abundant water, and the warm, moist climate enabled them to farm almost as they had in Ireland. Cattle were exported from Galway to Montserrat and seemed to thrive when crossed with the local stock. But now the Irish were the masters, and like all other West Indian planters, they had their quota of African slaves. A census of Montserrat taken in the mid-17th century lists the population as Irish 2,000, English 700, Scots 52, African slaves 1,000. It's a widely held view in Montserrat today that the Irish landowners treated their slaves with more care and kindness than did the English and Scots. However true that may be, there's still a warm welcome for the Irishman in Montserrat today, as Corkman Barney Columbia found when he came to settle here in retirement.
We have the sea, on my side anyhow, we have the sea below us and the mountains rising up behind, and very much like the southwest of Ireland. So that, I think, was one of the first things that made me feel that I'd like to stay here. And after 9.5 years, I'm still in love with the place, and I wouldn't want any place else except possibly to go back to Ireland.
A number of the first Irish settlers were families who had been deprived of their land by the English plantation. The first governor of Montserrat, Anthony Brisket, was a Wexford landlord, removed from his Irish estate in 1613. In compensation for his confiscated Wexford land, he was given a commission by the British Crown to travel to the West Indies and set up a plantation in Montserrat. Several of the farmlands of the island still bear the names of their original Irish owners: Farrell's estate, Furlong's estate, O'Gara's estate, Sweeney's estate.
Overgrown now and abandoned, this estate, known as Blake's estate, dates back to the year 1646. In that year, John Blake, the mayor of Galway, was dispossessed of his Galway estates by the Cromwellian planters. Blake moved to a smaller farm in Mullamore, but his two sons couldn't put up with this change of fortune. So they sold out in Galway and moved to the West Indies, where they bought this plantation in Montserrat. There now began a lively commercial exchange between Galway and Montserrat, the two sons exporting tobacco and sugar to Galway, and the father exporting cattle from Galway to Montserrat and Barbados.
But the West Indies soon began to import beef from Virginia and Bermuda, and with transatlantic freight prices running high, the trade to and from Galway diminished. The tobacco crop too declined for a few years. So Thomas Blake sold his Montserrat farm to his cousin, and on the proceeds returned to Galway, where he bought the Renville estate. The farm gradually ran down. The estate of another Galway family, the Curwens, is still a going concern. The current price of rum per barrel, or the most fancied runner of the 3:30 in Bridgetown next Saturday, are still discussed in the elegant rooms of this typical planter's house. The records of his mother's family, the Galway Curwens, who left Ireland 300 years ago, are carefully guarded by the present owner, John Hollander.
Through the history of Galway, we see that they had 12 leading families there. And the funny thing is that we have practically all the names of those families. We have the Blakes, the Bodkins, the Browns, the Darcys, the Deans, the Frenches, the Joyce, the Curwens, the Lynch, the Martins, the Morrises, and the Skerritts. And in the history of Galway, it says that John Curwen buying the castle of Haggett and doing it up. And he put in new glass windows instead of the leaden louvers that were there before, through the fortune that he'd made from his properties that he had in the West Indies.
What year would that be about?
1680 or something. They have that in here as.
Most Irish planters didn't make a fortune in Montserrat, but they did hold on to something more precious, their faith. This is the Galway estate, one of the earliest of the Irish plantations, covering the side of one of Montserrat's 3 volcanic mountains. These ruins were once the quarters of the slaves of the Galway family. Irish planters were the first to allow their slaves to be baptized and to give them freedom. Just beyond the ruins of the slave quarters is the striking remains of what is probably the oldest Catholic church on the island. But the first Irish settlers didn't long enjoy freedom to worship here. By the 1640s, the persecution they had fled from followed them to Montserrat. Dr. Howard Fergus, university lecturer in Plymouth, has just completed a history of the island. I asked him what brought about this change in the fortunes of the Irish in Montserrat.
I think that this had to do with their religion, which was Roman Catholicism. In fact, although the English in St. Kitts, which is just nearby, did make a treaty with the French in 1627, against a common enemy like the Spanish and the Caribs, the English never really trusted the French, and this was partly because of their religion. This is why, for instance, England occupied the center of St. Kitts while the French were at both ends. So that when Montserrat became the asylum for Roman Catholics from Ireland and elsewhere next door, the English were again suspicious of the Irish and consequently of the people in Montserrat.
And why should this suspicion of the French transfer to the Irish?
Well, as you know, the French were essentially Catholics, and it was feared that, especially with events in England, happening in the Stuart period, that the Irish in Montserrat and the French Irish in St. Kitts could rise up. In other words, there could be a rebellion in Montserrat against the planter lords.
So suddenly and with relentless vigour, the tide began to run against the Irish Catholics of Montserrat. Twice the French conquered the island, but each time they were beaten off by the English. This left the Puritans in power. Anti-Catholic and afraid of another French-Irish alliance, they kept the Irish down. Attendance at Mass was forbidden. Catholic priests were denied entry. The Irish appealed to Rome for a priest, and in 1650 a Limerick Jesuit, Father John Stritch, volunteered to make the dangerous journey. He first travelled to St. Kitts, and after a few months set sail for Montserrat. There was little hope of his getting past the port authorities dressed as a Catholic priest, so Father Stritch disguised himself as a timber merchant. He set up camp, carrying on his timber business by day, and by word of mouth let the Irish know of his real identity. He risked imprisonment if caught, and so did all who came to receive the sacraments from him. He speaks of the joy of the Irish when they heard he had arrived. They came to Mass at his hideout, travelling at night and using cliff paths so as to avoid the roads where guards were posted.
We owe it to Father Stritch's records for the account of the barbarous story of Crab Island. The Puritans arrested one night 125 of the leading Irish citizens of Montserrat and dumped them on an uninhabitable chunk of rock called Crab Island. They managed to survive there for a few days on whatever they could gather at the seashore, but after a while they signalled a Spanish boat which stopped. The boat was too small to carry the whole party, but it did take a group of them to the French island of Guadeloupe, where they were warmly welcomed. As for the others, no one is quite sure what happened to them, but the commonest story is that they built a raft in the hope of escaping from Crab Island, but it foundered in the Caribbean Sea and they were all drowned.
The largest number of Irish emigrants to the West Indies didn't belong to the planter class. They were workers who travelled to the West Indies as servants. The indentured worker was given a free passage across the Atlantic. In return, he would work as a slave for a period of 5 to 7 years. During that time he got no pay, had no rights, and lived in primitive conditions. His only real right was that when the period of indenture was over, he was set free and given a plot of land to work for himself.
A great number of the Irish immigrants were either indentured servants or prisoners. They arrived here at the wharf in Montserrat. The first of the indentured servants were only finishing their time of service when the sugar boom hit the West Indies. Montserrat planters turned to sugar and the price of land rocketed. There were no longer any small plots available for the freed indentured servants. The problem was added to by the fact that sugar is a labour-intensive crop and thousands of workers were required to harvest the cane. The African slaves hadn't yet been imported in any great numbers, so the prisons of Ireland were emptied of anyone, political prisoner or criminal, who was strong enough to make the crossing of the Atlantic and harvest the sugar.
In parts of the West Indies, ghetto colonies of the descendants of these white workers still exist. Still working class in an environment where the white people belong almost exclusively to the management class, they are a source of curiosity to the well-off. Smarting under the name of redlegs from their black neighbours, they have largely kept to themselves, and especially married only within their own race. They have adapted unsurely to local conditions, their white skins fragile and delicate under the continuous tropical sun. Skin disease is common. Many of the younger ones emigrate to Australia or the United States. But in Montserrat, the indentured workers found themselves at home much more quickly. Undoubtedly, the decision to intermarry with the Negro population was a major factor in this. Not that all of the Irish in Montserrat made the adjustment to a new way of life with equal ease. The courtroom in Plymouth has heard quite a few Irish names, and still does, even today.
Monday's Court, Noel Skerritt, larceny. Joseph Galloway, throwing missiles, indecent language. Neville Dwyer, battery. Sylvester Hogan, larceny. Raymond O'Gara, indecent language, arming with offensive weapons, throwing missiles. Martha Skerritt, larceny. Tomorrow's Court, William Sullivan versus Donald Fergus, assault and battery. Agnes Roach versus Maggie Buffant, damages for trespass. Donald Sullivan versus Kathy Mead, assault and battery. It looks as if we handed on more than just our names.
The home of Mr. and Mrs. Allen is also the local post office. Their soft accents are typical of Montserrat and might easily be confused with the lilt in parts of West Cork and Kerry.
Well, my mother was a white lady. She was born at Baker's Hill, and they were living there. They had a estate there.
We have Allens, Daly, Sweeney's, Ryan.
They're all related to you, are they?
They are all one relation.
Now, how did the family come to Montserrat, Mr. Allen?
Well, the Irish people came to Montserrat on account of Cromwell, where it was exile. We heard they had some fighting there, and the Irish people came and they was inside. So they was sent out of the island. So, and we are some of the old descendant remains.
And did your mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, did they have any memories of Ireland, or did they talk about it or anything like that?
Well, his death told us what we hear.
The Sweeneys have been in Montserrat for over 10 generations, but Grandma Sweeney looks and sounds as if she'd just come from a good summer holiday in Ballycotton.
In 1969, I went to New York. So in my visit, people ask me anything, and when I speak, they say, "You can see I come from Ireland." Every talk I talk, they say I come from Ireland, and I resemble them in the everything. So that's the reason why we are here in Montserrat as island people.
When they asked you, did you come from Ireland, what did you say?
I say, sure.
My grandfather and my father were quite light-skinned. And in fact, my grandfather had blue eyes and straight hair. Because one of my uncles, my daughter and I had such a joke. One of my uncles, who died about 5 years ago in Ohio in the United States, when he was admitted to the hospital, I guess the nurses didn't worry to ask him what his ethnic origin was. They just put him down as white, and we had such a joke when we went into the hospital, and they give you this form to be filled out.
The people of Montserrat today couldn't list many of the great names of Irish history, but there are two they all know: Arthur Guinness and Oliver Cromwell. The name of Guinness is, of course, held in high esteem, while that of Cromwell is mentioned with almost the same dread as in Ireland. It was under the press ganging of Cromwell that hundreds of people from Cork, Kilkenny and Drogheda were expelled to the West Indies. They would have arrived just as the first importations of African slaves took place. So, both cruelly uprooted from their homes, Irish and African Negro shared a common suffering, a common grievance, and for the most part lived together in peace and common understanding. However, there is a record of one insurrection of black slaves against their Irish masters.
St. Patrick's Day was chosen because the Irish would have been celebrating that day, and the slaves thought that this was a good day to perhaps take them unawares. In the end, the plot was betrayed by slaves themselves, and this could stem from perhaps some love for the Irish masters, I don't know.
There have been some wild stories told about it, but then it never amounted to anything much. They blamed some old woman, they called her Fanny Garvey or something, because she is supposed to let the cat out of the bag before it actually happened or something. Whether that's true or not, I really can't tell you. But
do you think that the relationship between the slaves and the Irish settlers were better in Montserrat than they were, say, between slaves and English settlers or other settlers in the other islands around?
Boy, that I couldn't answer, because of course, when I arrived out here, everything of slavery was over. And even so, when they say that slavery was abolished in 1832 or something like that, or forget the year, it had been finished before that. It wasn't economical to keep them. And people had found that they had to give them freedom to get them to do anything that for years before.
The fact that many Montserrat people have Irish names does not necessarily mean they have Irish blood. Just before slave emancipation in the early 19th century, hundreds of Negroes were baptized. As slaves, they had no surnames, so they took the name of their master or of the plantation. Father Patrick O'Brien, an Irish missionary who came to Montserrat in 1777, administered these mass baptisms. His old baptismal registers have been studied by his successor, Belgian missionary Bishop Anthony de Metz.
Well, when you consider the register of Father Patrick O'Brien, you notice pages and pages, which names of slaves, written in a hurry, badly written, had a good handwriting, but this is kind of badly written in a hurry, and at the end of 4 or 5 pages of names, you would just have the estate's name, the name of a godfather and a godmother, meaning all those people became Catholics in one day. And then a few days later, you find the same thing about another estate. So you can see that hundreds and hundreds. Remember, there were something like 10,000 slaves in Montserrat in those days. So you find hundreds and hundreds coming over in one day.
This is the cemetery of the Anglican Church of St. Peter's in the north of Montserrat. Of the hundreds of headstones that stand here, I could count fewer than 12 that don't bear Irish names. Sweeney, Fergus, Allen, Lee, Hogan, Burke. The great majority of these must once have been Catholics. How is it they now lie in a Protestant graveyard? In 1834, when the slaves were given their emancipation in the West Indies, the Montserrat slaves took Irish names and were baptized Catholic, 5 out of 6, so that by 1835, 5 out of 6 of the population of Montserrat was Catholic. Now, 140 years later, the percentage is 1 in 10 Catholic. What happened? It's possible to speculate on the effect of proselytism over the years, or the denial of civil rights to Catholics, which lasted well into the 19th century. Probably the real and the truest reason, however, is that for the last 70 years of the 19th century, the Catholics in the north of Montserrat had no priest, no mass, and no services that they could recognize. So it's natural that they turned to the church which seemed closest to what they had known before, the Anglican Church, with its tabernacle, its sanctuary lamp, its candles, vestments, stations of the cross.
Montserrat Catholics today are centred mainly on the area around Plymouth. This is probably due to the influence of one of the most famous Montserrat Irish families, the Hamiltons. Before the Catholics were allowed to have a church in the town, the Hamiltons gave their large business premises on Parliament Street as a place of worship. The building is still called Treselyan, or Shamrock House. The occasional priest visitor to Montserrat said Mass there. It kept a remnant of the faithful together.
I pray, Lord, that whatever I do, or whatever my hands find to do, Lord, it may be prosperous. I pray that whatever I do, it may be a help to others. What I can do, Lord, help me to do. Give me courage that I might be able to learn and labor truly for my honest living, that I will never beg my bread as long as I live. To Lord.
But whatever their present religious affiliations, the people of Montserrat still have a faith in the presence of God and the reality of His will in their lives, which is very similar to the country faith of the Irish.
You know, in the west of Ireland particularly, there are so many, very poor people who have so little. And they seem to be, well, satisfied or content. And an expression I used to hear so often amongst them, God is good. And all the people here seem to have the same faith and a belief in the Almighty, and that they don't worry. They're content, even though they have so little. And they're very, very much alike in their ways. I think they probably, well, there's some of the Irish handed down to them.
There must have been times when the Irish emigrant workers in Montserrat felt as if they were walking through the deep mists of a soft summer's day in Ireland. 4,500 miles to the northeast lay home, but once they left it, few returned to make that long and expensive journey across the Atlantic. So they tried to make Montserrat a home from home, a place where the old Irish customs and comforts would be enjoyed and preserved.
I've always heard that we speak with a distinct Irish brogue.
Yes, they have somewhat of a similar accent. And then, of course, you'll find a number of redheads, which would be an Irish characteristic also.
But I know from tourists who come over, they tell me, oh yes, Bishop, these are Irish. We notice it by the names. So many have black hair, blue eyes, very beautiful. And then they speak so often about the weather. And that's what we always do in Ireland. They begin the conversation by speaking of the weather.
That came to Montserrat traditionally, I think, because my mother told us of illicit distilling in the mountains. And the distillers used to seek a very a valley away from, almost away from habitation to do the distilling. And this rum was called Mountain Dew. And it was perfectly white, not colored at all. It was sold very cheap. I think it was 3 penny for a half a bottle then.
They were terrifically fond of wakes. When anybody died, there was a huge party that night for them to sort of keep them all company. And of course, the coffin had to be built locally and all that, and done in the yard and while they. But I know when it came out, the wake was the famous Irish tradition of keeping up the wake.
Are you a dancer yourself?
Not very much, but my mother was a great dancer. And at evening sometimes when she was at leisure, she used to dance the jig and show us the real Irish dance. So Irish is really, seem to be in the blood. It is.
Ethnologists have described the Irish as the whitest race in the world. Certainly in the US, where Irish and Negro have lived in close proximity, the result has often been acute tension. Yet here in Montserrat, Irish and Negro have lived side by side in peace. Black or white, most of them didn't choose to come to Montserrat. Yet once here they formed a relationship which must be almost unique. It survived the running battles of French and English settlers. It survived the social revolution which brought about the ending of slavery. It even survived an occasional internal insurrection. And in Montserrat, Irish and Negro haven't just lived together in peace as two separate communities, but have merged into what is in effect almost a new race, black in colour, but possessing many of the best traits of the Irish. Perhaps the white Irish of Ireland and America today have something to learn from the black Irish of Montserrat.
I've heard that the Irish are very friendly people, and I think that we took pages out of the Irish book for friendliness. In fact, Montserrat is known to be one of the most, or the most friendly island of the West Indies. You find people, as they go along, they say good morning, good afternoon. They like to converse. I mean, strangers don't look like strangers to them. They're really very friendly and hospitable. So, and I think that's typical of the Irish, very typical of the Irish.
We will now conclude with Brendan from Tommy Makem.
Our mast and keel were made of oak, we had cowhide all around. She was fitted right, she was watertight, and we were outward bound. Our sails were white in the morning light, the Celtic cross our sign. By Brendan blessed, we were headed west, and the land fell far behind. We'd a favoring wind for weeks on end, and we could take our ease. One cloudy morn, it suddenly turned and brought us mountainous seas. Between the waves was darkened caves, and Brendan brought us through. He wrote a prayer that the Lord might spare our ship and all its crew. Brendan, holy Brendan, he sailed uncharted waters, he discovered lands unknown. Brendan, holy Brendan, he was a saintly sailor, and he steered us safely home. We saw strange sights both days and nights, and Brendan wrote them down. Fish that fly, and a rainbow sky, and a floating crystal town. And a giant thing that could swim and sing blew water through its head, and a fish that talked and on water walked, and a crew that was damn near dead. We had nearly died when Brendan cried, "There's land full near ahead, an albatross, our bow has crossed, and we're approaching land." We ran aground on the land new found, and we rested many days. Spirits were good, fresh water and food, and we all sang Brendan's praise. It was turning cold, and it might take hold, and we headed out once more. We were southward bound, and the only sound was the wind and the water's roar. We had no storm, and the sun turned warm, and we once again made land, with fruits to eat, all fresh and sweet, a paradise for man. Now we're home again, through the wind and rain, and homeland hills look green, and Brendan's charts map out the parts, where nowhere else had been. Now winter nights, by the firelight, I live it all again, how a saintly man with a prayer and a plan had charted the western main.
In the first St. Brendan's journey, the Irish monks came to a slag-covered island, whose fierce inhabitants flung burning coals at them. The sea hissed, the air was filled with stench, while the island blazed like a furnace. To those in search of Brendan's path, volcanic Iceland provides the same scenes to this day. Brendan's second season started with a change of diet. Smoked and salted meats replaced the modern dehydrated foods the sea could spoil. Now there was no room for error. Brendan was starting out into the stormiest waters of the North Atlantic, almost empty of ships, with Greenland's ice edge for a lee shore, and little hope of rescue if anything went wrong. Refitting the medieval boat was easy. Just secure the H-frame aft, prop in the masts, strap in the heavy quarter oar, and Brendan was ready for sea. Eden could not join them, so now only Boots, George, Trondur and Tim faced the last, most dangerous leg of their voyage of rediscovery. Short-handed in their cockleshell boat, their decision to set sail was a determined act of faith.
It's a toast to St. Brendan on St. Brendan's Day.
St. Brendan.
St. Brendan.
At 200 miles, Brendan passed beyond the protective care of Iceland's Coast Guard patrols. Within 48 hours, the weather began to deteriorate rapidly. Weather reports forecast a series of deep depressions swirling across their path.
Radio, Brendan calling Prince Christiansen. Radio.
On deck, George prepared for the gales that lay ahead. Trondur, imperturbable as ever, went on fishing as long as the weather allowed. Even as the wind strengthened, he used dead birds to lure others down from the sky. By May 24th, Brendan was running into gales rising to force 9. Sail was shortened to a bare minimum. The crew put on full survival gear. In case they broke free, the sail bonnets were cut clear of the stove. The ominous clatter of the pumps began. Brendan turned and ran downwind to survive. Her draft was only 15 inches. If she capsized in those icy waters, her crew would have 3 minutes to live. Cold food was all the flooded galley allowed. On the night of May 25th, 2 rogue waves struck Brendan, each half swamped her, and only desperate bailing kept her afloat. To prevent further swamping, the crew rigged a shield of spare ox hides to fend off the seas. They streamed out heavy ropes to slow her down. For 5 days and nights, the storms pounded at Brendan. The boat so many had sworn would fall apart before ever she left the British Isles. When on May 29th the weather brought a lull, every stitch of clothing on board had been drenched, but no sun came out to dry it. The future looked very cold and damp. But Brendan had carried them through the worst. Not a stitch, not a thong had been torn or displaced, and her leather hull had hardened in the icy water like metal.
Sailing ship Brendan, sailing ship Brendan, sailing ship Brendan.
Brendan had been blown far out of radio range by the storm. She was adrift now, on her own, with only her friends the whales for company on the deep. With no sun sight to plot their position, Tim had only the currents and the speed and direction of winds by which to work out where they were. And now he made a bold decision. To clear the area of bad weather, he would take Brendan right up to the Greenland ice. There he hoped to find the winds that blow along the ice edge. It was a good decision. They picked up strong north winds that blew them south, past the tip of Greenland, at over 100 miles a day. They were now between Greenland and Canada, where the weather brought freak combinations of high wind and seas with dense fog, part of the notorious fog banks of the northwest Atlantic. On his journey, St. Brendan was asked by one of his companions, "Do you know what this fog is?" "What?" said St. Brendan. "This fog encircles that land you've been seeking these 7 years." Was the fog through which the modern Brendan now sailed coincidence? Or was it further proof of ancient Irish knowledge of these icy waters? Severe weather had battered another tiny ocean traveller. One day a small migrating bird dropped exhausted on Brendan's deck. The interlude was quickly over. Next morning the bird was dead, frozen. With no radio contact for several days, Tim switched on Brendan's emergency transmitter in case a search and rescue operation had been mounted for her. When the skies did clear, the crew saw a sight ahead they had hoped to avoid: the edge of the Labrador pack ice.
West. Over.
Canada's Coast Guard warned that heavy pack ice stretched away unbroken to the coast of Labrador. But the way lay clear to Newfoundland. A fine northwest wind rose up to push them home. The crew relaxed in anticipation of the long journey's end. They had barely 200 miles to go. Suddenly, in the small hours of June 18th, came a sickening rasp that no one at first recognized. Brendan had run into ice. The very wind that swept her home had broken the pack to the north and blown it across her path. Only in the sulphurous light of dawn could her danger be clearly seen. There was no escape, no choice but to worm a way through. In his time, St. Brendan met what he called a column of crystal. An iceberg, perhaps? He even closed with it and measured it. Such curiosity did not rule today. Throughout the day, Brendan staggered forward through the same ice that a week before had sunk a steel icebreaker nearby. Yet here was she, a medieval boat of leather. After 14 hours, the danger seemed to be lessening, when suddenly, Brendan struck a submerged piece of ice. She gave a peculiar shudder. She was whole. Anxiously, her crew searched for the puncture in her hull. The hole was found, a few inches below the waterline, and spare leather was cut to mend it. Plunging raw hands into the frozen sea, George started stitching from the outside. If he failed, Brendan was done for. Inside the hull, Trondor passed the needle backwards. 3 frozen hours later, Brendan was saved and watertight again. Leaving the pack ice behind, she sailed on for her goal. Life on board returned to its old patterns. Trondor fed them, George steered them, Boots took pictures, and Tim made contact with land.
Calling D-Read, over.
St. Anthony's, a Coast Guard station on the Newfoundland coast, 180 miles away.
This is St. Anthony Coast Guard Radio, St. Anthony Coast Guard Radio. Yes, I'm reading you, but your signals are very weak. Go ahead.
My position is 4180 north, 4136 west. All well on board. Over.
Vessel St. Brandon, St. Anthony, roger, roger, roger.
Do you have a weather forecast, please? Over. Thank you. I will contact you again the same time tomorrow.
Brendan's isolation was almost over. The Coast Guard vessel John Cabot, under her master Captain Evis, was steaming for a rendezvous.
Sailing vessel St. Brennan, this is Coast Guard ship John Cabot. Sir, I read you very barely. Over.
It's a small craft. You just be careful.
Coast Guard vessel John Cabot. Coast Guard vessel John Cabot. What colour is your vessel, please? What colour? Over.
Sailing vessel Brennan, we have a white superstructure and a red hull. Over.
Roger, roger. We see you now south of us. We have you visual. Over.
Roger, sir. We have you visually also. Over.
Don't tell me he's well south of his position. That's him there. By God, it sure looks like him. I just estimate he's only doing about 2 knots there at the moment.
Sailing vessel Brendan, John Cabot. Can I have a position check, please?
Roger, roger. A few minutes, I'll give you the position. By the way, a few minutes ago, 10 o'clock, we estimated you 38 miles north of us. And we just picked you up on the radar there. You were 5 miles away. Over.
Yes, that's the way we move. Mostly by navigation. Over.
They really have a lot of guts, I think, to attempt it in such a frail-looking craft.
With Captain Evis on the launch came journalists and cameramen who had followed the voyage from its beginning.
Nice to see you.
Hello.
Thought you'd never make it.
Well, we're here now, you see.
Great. Thank you. Is this best come aboard here, sir?
Huh?
Come aboard this one, probably best.
Here, little gift. Oh. Bottle of scotch and a carton of cigarettes.
Thank you very much. Come aboard.
Right there, eh? Oh. Yeah, pleasure, I assure you. You're,
I'm Tim Severin.
Glad to meet you, Tim.
Thank you
My
very
pleasure.
much for bringing John Cabot out. We're tremendous to see you.
My heavens, this is something exceptional. Really, my God.
I must say, I think you're the third vessel we've seen since setting out from Iceland. We saw
6 to 7 weeks ago?
Yes, on May the 7th. We saw 2 boats off Labrador, off the pack ice, and that's it. We saw Faroese boat and U.S. Navy vessel, and that was it.
Actually, we were lucky this morning. Just ran right into you. You know, we were heading, you might have seen us approaching. We were heading a little bit more to the eastward. Then the lookout called down, said there's something just flying on the port bow, you know, and I got looking at it, I said, geez, now, just got a position from you and you were supposed to be about 38 miles.
Yeah.
Can't be him, but geez, he's awfully small. Anyway, after the second, third look, I realized that it was. I could see your cross up there.
Really
you know,
is it?
with
Can I offer you a small tot of Icelandic Brennivin?
Icelandic what?
Brennivin. They have. It's called the blackjack.
Blackjack.
Like Norwegian. I'm afraid it's not terribly hygienic aboard this boat, but there we are. Goes best with a good salt water. Are you going to have some photograph? Get some.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll have a mug, thank you. Bloody peasant. I'm going to
How many are Irish here, you say?
His name's Maloney, but he claims...
I married an Irish girl in St. John's. Second time around. We have a house called Breffany. I was just wondering if anybody ever heard the name. Is there a village in Ireland? This is supposed to be... It's not a town, apparently, because we have a National Geographic map. In fact, Mr. Colson and I were trying to find it last night. The house is Breffney. And this chap came from Ireland and he named the house Breffney after his home. Village, town, or what have you. So it can't be a town, it must be a village.
It could be the name of a pub.
When the John Cabot left, Captain Evis promised a reception committee for Brendan's landfall. She was now all but in sight of her goal and the coast of North America. After 50 days at sea from Iceland, with more than 4,000 miles behind her since leaving Ireland the year before, Brendan's pursuit of a legend was coming to an end. And the legend had looked more like the truth with every mile. On her last morning at sea, her old friends the whales surfaced alongside her in a dance of farewell. In 1977, the leather boat Brendan reached the New World at 8 p.m. on June the 26th on the shore of Peckford Island off the Newfoundland coast. She reached the shore, and a man was landing. She had nothing more to prove.
We'll just take her to the harbour. Sarah. George, we'll take you out now. We got you ashore.
Men had come from Europe in a medieval boat of hide. And now, in motor cars, the seagoing men of Newfoundland surged down to greet them and to wonder at their vessel. As they were towed into Musgrave Harbour and safe moorings, Brendan's crew could see Captain Evis had lived up to his word. The reception committee was there in force. From a harbour in Ireland, across an ocean to a harbour in Canada, Brendan and her voyage had caught the imagination of seafaring people in ports and shipping lanes throughout the North Atlantic. Though she'd not always known it, she'd been watched out for in Scotland, in Faroes, in Iceland and Greenland, and lastly in Canada. Yet through it all, it was Brendan herself alone who had weathered both storms and ice to get her crew home.
Okay, you running, John? We're rolling. Okay. Well, are you satisfied with everything that you've done?
Pretty much so. I think we're all, just overwhelmed that it's all worked out so well.
Tell me, what was the worst part of your trip?
I think we probably each one of us got a worst part. For me, it was we ran into some very heavy weather between Iceland and Greenland, but really heavy weather in the Denmark Strait. And we were out in it for about 24 hours, and I thought that every way it could have taken us. But we were lucky, and the boat looked after us.
And you did strike some ice that punctured her?
Yes, we were about 24 hours in the pack, and just as we were getting out of the pack, we were unlucky and we got nipped, and a sharp corner of what must have been very old ice punctured the hull. And of course, inevitably it was a gale, and inevitably we had night coming on, and we had a pretty dismal night pumping her out until dawn, and then George and Tranda managed to get a patch stitched on her in mid-ocean, which you couldn't do with anything but a leather hull.
Did it leak other than that?
No, we were actually taking less than 8 gallons a day.
Is there any sign at all of it deteriorating after all these months?
Absolutely none, and believe me, if we'd been in a wooden boat in the ice, we'd have just been crushed.
Does this satisfy you then that the devilish Irish probably did come across here?
It satisfies me that they had the technical knowledge and the ability to get here.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Canada.
We welcome them far over the sea, and so we've come to give them a royal welcome from Brendan and the 4 crews sailed the ocean blue, and here they are with every one of you. This is the royal welcome for the St. Brendan and her crew. We're very happy to give them. We're very proud that us have ever lived in this wonderful celebration. And a welcome that they so well deserve. Thank you for joining the parade too. Everybody, let it go at a time. I'm sure the captain is very happy. We're very happy to welcome here.
But Brendan's voyage is only part of the quest for the Irish navigators. In making the Brendan voyage, Tim Severin is not saying the search is over, but that only now can it truly begin.
And here, overlooking St. Luna Bay, in northeastern Newfoundland, are some marks on a rock, which, according to some archaeologists, may have been cut by Irishmen. We know that they are at least 200 years old because of this lichen mark here. On the back of the rock, there are more scratches covered with far thicker lichen, which places them as even earlier. It is said that this could be Ogham writing. It's not definite, but it's a possibility. The Brendan voyage has shown that the Irish monks could have reached the New World. The question now is, when can we find the final proof? Somewhere along this coast, perhaps, there's another rock, there's another carving, which will give the final proof. We know how it could have been done. Now it's up to us to look for the final evidence.